story opens with a girl walking away from a castle and heading toward the forest, and there is something noticeably different about the way she moves, because her step is lighter than it has been in years. The weight of constantly performing, of holding herself together purely for the comfort of everyone around her, begins to lift the very moment the castle disappears behind the trees. Her feet catch on some branches, and she nearly goes down completely. But instead of catching herself, she hits the ground laughing, because none of it matters anymore. The engagement has ended, and the prince was the one who called it off, which is the cleanest possible outcome since it means her family carries no blame and the royal household has no reason to come after anyone. She rolls around on the ground in pure, uncomplicated relief because her commoner life is no longer just a plan sitting in the distance. It is actually beginning right now. A month later, she is working in a bakery kitchen belonging to a woman named Michelle, and the other women in the shop are busy discussing Prince Seth's canceled engagement and wondering aloud what could have possibly gone wrong between him and the girl he was seeing. The young woman pulling a fresh batch of donuts out of the oven and listening to all of this without so much as a flicker of reaction is Fee, formerly known as Felicia Suarez, who happens to be the exact girl the gossip is circling around and finds the entire situation quietly amusing. She is genuinely happy here in a way that does not require any effort at all. The kitchen carries the warm smell of fresh bread, the work itself is satisfying, and none of it asks her to be anyone other than who she actually is underneath everything. She dropped the name Felicia along with all the rest of it, because that name never truly belonged to the real her anyway. Fee fits better since it is smaller and quieter and entirely her own. Two specific things set who she actually is apart from who Felicia was built to be. The first is that she carries a full set of memories from a previous life in a completely different world, and those memories are precisely why she came to recognize, slowly at first and then all at once, that the world she was reincarnated into is the setting of an Odom game she once played obsessively. The game was called Lady Rose, the savior of the nation, and she herself is its main character. The recognition did not arrive all at once but assembled gradually, with the final piece locking into place the moment she saw her fiancé and identified him as Prince Seth Cabot, the primary romantic lead of the entire game. After that, the world's internal logic began making a particular kind of sense, and she eventually stopped scrutinizing what could not hold up under examination. Michelle tells her she looks like she is genuinely enjoying herself, which is unusual enough to mention, and Fee confirms that she is. The warmth between them is real, and beyond the job, connections around town are growing, leftover bread from the shop keeps her fed daily, and she considers the luck of landing this position when she arrived with nothing to be a reasonable exchange from a universe that previously had not been especially kind to her. Michelle eventually notices that Fee takes home leftover bread every single day and appears to be living almost entirely on it. She raises the concern with genuine care, pointing out that bread is not a complete diet and that Fee is still young enough that it matters. Fee reassures her that it is a temporary situation and that she will sort out her eating habits once she is more settled. What she thinks, privately, is that she spent so many years with servants tracking her nutrition on her behalf that the habit of monitoring it herself simply never formed. She forgot that it was something she needed to do. Michelle pats her head and tells her to look after herself, then mentions that when she first saw Fee she assumed she was a noble's daughter based on her hair and her hands alone. Fee goes carefully still for a moment. Michelle follows this up by laughing and saying that obviously she was wrong, because no noble girl could ever look this genuinely content working in a bakery. Fee agrees with her out loud and thinks that Michelle is actually more correct than she realizes, just not in the direction she thinks. Which leads into the second thing that separates her from who Felicia was meant to be, the thing she internally labels her acting ability. When she first understood she had been dropped into the world of Lady Rose, her response was not excitement or curiosity. It was despair. She did not want to be queen. She did not want Seth. But open refusal was never a viable path because her parents did not raise her as a person. They raised her as a political instrument, and any resistance on her part would have resulted in them dismantling the engagement themselves and replacing it with something worse, some arrangement with an older man that she had even less say in. So she did not refuse. She performed. She knows exactly who Seth is and what he represents in the game. He is handsome, he is the central figure of the entire story, and she cannot stand him. Her previous life left her with a permanent intolerance for a very specific kind of man, the kind who moves through the world as though it was assembled around him personally, And Seth is that type refined to its purest form. Even as a dedicated fan of Lady Rose, she only plays his route once, just to complete the record while she returns to every other character's story again and again enthusiastically, well into the double digits, frequently emotional about it. But here is the thing about Seth's route that ends up being the most important thing she ever discovers in that game. His route is where Liliana Inachi appears most prominently. Liliana is a noble girl, the daughter of a well-established family, and she is completely and utterly in love with Prince Seth. That love curdles into hatred the moment the heroine enters the picture. Liliana's strategy is to go on the offensive with rumors, painting the heroine as someone cruel and manipulative, someone who bullies her and makes her life miserable. For a while it works, but eventually the truth surfaces. Liliana's fabrications are exposed for exactly what they are, and the consequences land hard. Her own family cuts ties with her. She is stripped of her noble status and pushed down into commoner life, which in this world is not just an inconvenience, but one of the sharpest social humiliations a noble can face. Fee looks at that outcome and sees everything she has ever wanted for herself laid out in a neat little narrative arc. The original heroine's response to Liliana is to push back, deny the accusations, and expose the lies. Fee's plan runs in the exact opposite direction. If she accepts every accusation Liliana makes rather than fighting them, the roles between them effectively reverse. Liliana walks away with her dignity intact and no reason to be punished, and Fee walks away with exactly the commoner demotion she has been quietly engineering for herself since she understood where she was. Everything between the start of that plan and the finish line just requires her to stay in character as the composed, proper noblewoman that her position demands, endure whatever Liliana decides to throw at her without cracking, and wait. She thinks about Liliana with something close to fondness. She laughs out loud about it in the middle of a workday. She is still in that good mood when a man steps through the bakery door. She greets him the same way she greets every other customer who walks in, easy and pleasant, and he responds by telling her he is here because he is searching for someone specific, a Lady Felicia Suarose. The name lands and she looks at him properly. It is Nika, Prince Nicholas Cabot, older half-brother to Prince Seth, and one of the named capture targets from the very game whose world she is currently living inside. The family situation between Nicholas and Seth is a little complicated. Nicholas is the son of one of the king's mistresses rather than the queen, which puts him in a lower position in the line of succession than Seth, who is the queen's son and therefore the official heir. But that gap in status does not appear to bother Nicholas even slightly, because he has never wanted the throne in the first place. What he wants is to be useful, to apply the considerable intelligence he was born with toward things that actually matter, like the welfare of the kingdom and the well-being of his younger brother. That is his whole character. That is what makes him genuinely likable in a way Seth simply is not. He apologizes for not placing her right away when he first walked in, explaining that the change in her hair length genuinely threw him off, and he did not connect the face to the name immediately. Fei does not waste any time with pleasantries before getting to the important part. She lets him know that she is currently living under the name Fei Kuro, that her noble status has been formally removed, and that given all of that, attaching honorifics to her name is no longer appropriate, and she would prefer he stop doing it. Nicholas responds by calling her Lady Felicia and gently suggesting that there is no real reason she needs to distance herself from her own name. She does not get flustered about it. She simply repeats herself with the same calm she used the first time and asks him again to call her Fee. He takes a moment and then agrees, telling her he will honor that going forward. But the condition he attaches is that she drop the formal address when speaking to him and go back to calling him the way she used to. She finds that reasonable and accepts without any drama. She turns toward Michelle after that, and even though she is the one asking for a favor, she frames it as an imposition and apologizes genuinely for the interruption. Michelle is not bothered at all, pointing out that the situation clearly carries some personal weight, and that it is not as though she is in a position to turn away someone of Nicholas's standing when he has come all this way specifically to speak with Fee. Fei still bows before stepping away, because regardless of what Michelle says, she has only been working here a month and leaving mid. Shift feels wrong even when she has been told it is fine. She catches up with Nicholas outside and the question of where to talk comes up. He suggests moving somewhere with more privacy and brings up the carriage he arrived in. That one small suggestion stops Fee cold for just a moment because she knows his route. She has played it. She knows what happens in that carriage. Nicholas reads as restrained and collected on the surface, and that reading is not entirely wrong. He genuinely is a sincere gentleman who would never in any deliberate way act inappropriately, especially not with the woman who was until recently his younger brother's fiancée. But his route is absolutely full of accidents. The game is all ages, so the writers solve the problem of making him compelling by constructing situation after situation where proximity and circumstance do the work without anyone's intentions being involved. The carriage scene is one of those situations. It exists in his route for a reason. Fee has no interest in accidentally stumbling into his romantic storyline. She redirects smoothly, mentioning that her house is close by and that while it is small, it is probably more comfortable than a moving carriage. Nicholas counters that an unmarried woman inviting a man into her private home is actually a more significant breach of convention than sharing a carriage, arguably worse from a propriety standpoint. Fee addresses that concern directly by pointing out that her commoner status removes most of the usual social weight from the situation, and she adds that if she does anything that offends him or crosses a line, he has every right to deal with it however he sees fit. It is a slightly unusual way to reassure someone, but it works. He agrees to go with her. The inside of her house is exactly as modest as she described it. She has bread left over from yesterday's shift and a variety of tea that cost almost nothing, and those are genuinely her only options for hospitality. She is still internally working through how to handle this when Nicholas speaks up first and tells her clearly that he does not need anything from her. He is the one who showed up without any warning or prior arrangement, so the responsibility for that is entirely his and she should not feel obligated to produce refreshments on his account. Fee exhales quietly and thinks, not for the first time since she met him, that it stretches credibility almost to the breaking point that this man and Seth grew up in the same palace under the same father. They are nothing alike. They settle into chairs across from each other and Nicholas does not ease into the conversation or spend time on pleasantries. He tells her directly what he came to say. He is going to work on clearing the false charges that were leveled against her, and his intention is to see her properly reinstated, her name restored, her position returned, everything that was taken from her given back. Fi is sitting across from him with an expression that reads as calm and politely attentive. Inside, she is absolutely horrified. In her previous life, Fi was simply a player on the other side of a screen, clicking through the story of Lady Rose, the savior of the nation without any personal stakes in the outcome. Now she is living inside that story, which is not something she ever asked for or wanted. She has shed her old name, outmaneuvered her own parents, survived an engagement she never wanted any part of, and deliberately positioned herself at the bottom of the social ladder, where nobody expects anything from her, and she can finally breathe without performing. It feels like a genuine victory, and it genuinely is one. But the problem is that the universe does not appear to be finished with her yet, because every time she creates enough distance between herself and the game's plot, one of the capture targets materializes directly in front of her as though the story itself is physically pulling her back in. Today that person is Evan Douglas, who in the game is the devoted, puppy love type that decides he is in love at first glance and builds his entire world around that single feeling without needing any encouragement to sustain it. He already knows she was engaged and that the situation surrounding her is complicated, but none of that stops him from planting himself repeatedly in her path and declaring loudly that he believes she is innocent and that he wants to stand beside her and fix everything. For Fee, who has been working very carefully to enjoy the quiet exit she constructed for herself, Evan is a walking disruption in every sense of the word. She handles him the way she handles most things, which is through performance. She tells him with complete conviction that everything that happened between herself and Liliana was her own fault. That jealousy over seeing Liliana close to the prince caused her to lose her judgment and behave in ways she is not proud of, and that her demotion is a punishment she accepts willingly because it is the only fair outcome. Eva absorbs all of this and asks with genuine anguish whether she truly loved the prince that deeply, and Fee produces tears with impressive reliability and confirms that it was the kind of love a person only experiences once. Internally, she is entirely focused on not accidentally triggering his romantic storyline, so she thanks him warmly for his concern, calls him a good and kind friend, and begins walking away. He calls after her regardless, telling her he has been in love with her and that he is willing to live as a commoner if it means remaining near her. She turns around, tells him clearly and gently to forget about her, and then walks away faster. That is one route successfully avoided. That whole encounter is still fresh, when she finds herself sitting across from Nicholas inside her small house, and he tells her he intends to clear her name. The words land differently coming from him because Nicholas is nothing like Evan. Evan runs entirely on emotion and instinct, while Nicholas operates on information and evidence, and the simple fact that he has shown up at all tells her he has already been doing the groundwork. He has almost certainly pieced together that the accusations against her were fabricated and that Liliana was behind them, which means whatever she says next will shape not only her own future but Liliana's as well, and she is carrying the full weight of that awareness as she sits there facing him. She tells him his help is not needed and that she fully intends to continue living as Fee. He pushes back, wanting to understand why she never defended herself from the beginning. She thinks carefully before answering. What she lands on is the truth, or close enough to it. She tells him that Liliana is genuinely a better match for the prince than she ever was. She means it more than he knows. Fee spent years performing affection for a man she found insufferable, smiling at him while privately counting the days until she could leave. Liliana actually loves Seth, wants to be queen, and has the emotional investment in that life that Fee never had and never pretended to have internally. The fit is obvious. Nicholas does not accept this. He lays out his position methodically, the way he does everything. His brother made serious errors that go beyond what an apology can cover. But that does not change the fact that Liliana's method of getting what she wanted involved fabricating serious accusations against the future queen. A person willing to do that, he argues, is not someone equipped to actually be queen. Beyond that, he considers Fee the most qualified candidate in the entire country for the role, and Liliana, in his estimation, lacks the experience, the judgment, and the basic understanding of appropriate conduct that the position demands. He finishes by calling her, with no softening of tone, simply not intelligent. Fee listens to him thoroughly dismantle her savior and responds by pointing out that Liliana only held the position of future queen for about a month, so her development is still at the very beginning. She argues that Liliana's feelings for the prince are genuine and deep, which is more than could be said for the previous arrangement, and that if the two of them work together properly, the kingdom will benefit from it eventually. Nicholas counters that a nation cannot be built on a foundation that includes injustice toward the innocent, and Fee thinks to herself that he is being enormously protective of someone who has already said she is fine. It is kind. It is also a little excessive given that Liliana is the reason Fee got everything she wanted. She keeps that to herself. She shifts her approach and asks him directly to drop the matter, assuring him she is genuinely content with her current life. She also adds one specific request, that he keep her whereabouts and circumstances away from the prince's attention, because if Seth finds out she is happily settled as a commoner, there is a real chance he decides that outcome is too comfortable and pushes for something worse. Nicholas looks at her for a moment, and something in his expression shifts towards something that reads almost like amusement. He calls her stubborn, stands up, and tells her he understands, but that he will be back, and that she should come to him if anything becomes difficult because he is not going anywhere. She smiles and tells him that if he is going to keep visiting, he should at least do it on her days off. He agrees and leaves. She goes back inside the bakery and updates Michelle on the day's record, keeping. Michelle is only half listening because she is watching the window with an expression that suggests she is waiting for something. When Fee asks 63 it, Michelle mentions casually that she thought he would be arriving around now, meaning the nobleman with the silver hair who has made a habit of coming by. She then informs Fee with complete confidence that he is clearly interested in her romantically because Fee is striking enough to turn heads, and he comes far too often for it to mean nothing. Fee dismantles this theory point by point. Nicholas comes because he feels responsible for her situation, because his brother's actions are the reason she is here, and because his own character makes it impossible for him to simply walk away from someone he considers under his informal protection. There is also his distaste for Liliana, which gives him additional reason to check on the person Liliana wronged. She tells Michelle plainly that it is not a love story and apologizes for the disappointment. Michelle considers this, asks if she is really certain, accepts her answer, and then reveals that he is at the door. Nicholas steps in, apologizes for the timing, and Michelle greets him with enthusiasm and informs Fee that since her companion has arrived to walk her home, she is released from the rest of her shift. Fee starts to protest that they are not together in the way Michelle is implying and that her shift is not technically finished yet. Michelle points out that the shop is nearly closed, that Nicholas has already purchased all the remaining unsold bread, and that the only task left is cleaning up, which she is perfectly capable of handling alone. She physically steers Fi toward the door and closes it behind her. Fi finds herself standing outside next to Nicholas, whose guards are holding an impressive quantity of bread, and she takes in the overall picture of royal elegance surrounded by baked goods and feels the mismatch of it immediately. She asks what actually happens to all the bread he buys, internally assuming it goes to servants or gets passed along to someone more appropriate than a prince. He tells her it gets eaten by him. He even specifies a favorite, the flat cheese bread, and mentions it with genuine enthusiasm. Fi stares at him. She looks at the guards to see if anyone is intervening. The guards are all carefully looking at various points in the middle distance, completely uninvested in stopping their prince from enthusiastically consuming commoner bakery leftovers. She arrives at the conclusion that they have collectively decided this is not their problem anymore and have simply accepted it. Nicholas asks if something is wrong. She tells him it is nothing and that she is glad he enjoys the bread, because what else is there to say? He mentions that he is looking forward to whatever she bakes in the future, and there is something in the way he says it that is lighter than his usual manner, less composed and more genuinely warm. Fi notices the shift and cannot quite categorize it. He is supposed to be the cool, quietly intense older brother type. This is something else, something softer and more unguarded. She files it away as something to monitor and decides for now it is not posing any immediate threat to her carefully maintained peace of mind. Several months pass and Fi settles deeper into her life at Michelle's bakery. She has graduated from assistant work to actually baking the bread herself, which feels like a real milestone, until she notices that her loaves consistently come out different from Michelle's even when she follows the exact same steps with the exact same ingredients. Bread is deceptively complicated, and she has developed a genuine respect for how much skill it actually takes. She decides today is the day she pushes herself harder and finally closes that gap, heads toward the shop to grab what she needs, and discovers the door is locked. She peers through the window and the realization hits her slowly. It is a holiday. She has been so absorbed in the rhythm of working that she completely lost track of the calendar. She presses her frustration into the glass for a moment, genuinely disappointed about losing a practice day, and then someone speaks behind her. The voice says Big Sister Felicia, and Fi goes completely still. She turns around and there is a young man standing there, looking at her with a casual familiarity that does not quite match the fact that they have barely spoken in their lives. He comments that it has been a while and notes, almost as an afterthought, that he probably does not need to use formal language with her anymore given how things have changed. His name is Jed Suarose, and he is technically her former stepbrother. The situation with Jed requires some background. When Fi's engagement to the prince was formalized, her parents suddenly needed to think about what happened to the family line after her, since she would be moving into the royal household. Her father resolved this by adopting Jed from a distant branch of the family, almost certainly without giving the boy much of a choice in the matter. Jed ended up inheriting the position and the name that Fi vacated when everything fell apart. They lived under the same roof and attended the same school, but Fi kept her distance from him deliberately and consistently. In the game, Jed carries the label of the trap character, meaning his entire narrative function revolves around drawing the heroine into complicated emotional situations she did not sign up for, and Fi had no intention of becoming a casualty of that. Jed tells her, with the ease of someone who does not feel the need to explain himself thoroughly, that he was simply curious about how she was getting on. Fi points out that he has traveled a considerable distance to check on someone he never made much effort to speak to when they shared a house. He shrugs this off and mentions that he did not have school and got bored. Fi scans the area around him and notices there is no carriage, no escort, nothing. Nobody makes that journey alone out of boredom. She decides the fastest way to get to the truth is to bring him inside rather than stand in the street asking questions that he will just deflect, so she invites him to her house and he accepts, mentioning with open curiosity that he has never seen the inside of a commoner's home before. Once inside, he picks up one of the snacks Nicholas brought on a previous visit and tries it, then announces with complete frankness that high-quality food like this looks deeply out of place in a house like hers. She tells him Nicholas gave them to her. Jed pauses and asks whether she means Prince Nicholas Cabot and why exactly a prince is coming to visit her. She gives him the simple version, explaining that Nicholas feels a degree of responsibility toward her because of how harshly things ended up going. She thinks privately about the full picture. The prince annulling the engagement was not itself an unreasonable thing, but her parents turned it into a demotion to commoner status, which in this world is treated as a punishment roughly equivalent in severity to a death sentence. Nobles have too much pride and too little practical knowledge to survive it well in most cases. The social adjustment alone destroys people. Fee manages it because she came into this life already knowing how to exist without inherited status, and because she spent time deliberately preparing herself for exactly this outcome. That preparation is what makes her daily life feel like freedom rather than collapse. Jed watches her pour tea and tells her she looks genuinely well, that commoner life seems to suit her, and asks if she is actually happy. She confirms that she is. He considers this and then says, with the tone of someone testing an idea rather than making a serious proposal, that maybe he should arrange to get himself thrown out too, and asks if he can move in with her. Internally, Fee rejects this with every part of herself. Outwardly, she reminds him that he is the only heir to the Suarose family and that saying things like that, even as a joke, is genuinely irresponsible. He fires back that this is rich coming from the person who successfully engineered her own exit. Fee wonders if he is trying to push her into admitting something. Then his tone shifts into something quieter and more deliberate. He tells her that she has always struck him as someone carrying something hidden underneath the surface, that from the moment he met her she was this perfectly composed young lady everyone called Lady Rose, someone who smiled through everything and handled every situation with ease, but that he always sensed there was something underneath that she was protecting. He tells her he always figured she was keeping a significant secret. Fei recognizes this. She has played Jed's route enough times to know exactly where that line leads, and it does not lead anywhere she wants to go. Before he can finish the next sentence, she grabs a piece of bread and throws it directly at his face. It bounces off and lands in his lap. There is a beat of complete silence. He looks down at it. She fills the silence immediately and with great energy, announcing that there is leftover bread from yesterday, and that whatever strange mood he is in right now is clearly because he is hungry. Because that is the only reasonable explanation, and that Michelle's bread is genuinely exceptional and will improve anyone's emotional state significantly, including his. He picks up the bread. He starts eating. He thanks her for the food. Fee exhales very quietly and congratulates herself internally. She knows exactly what the end of that sentence was going to be. The line that follows the secret speech in Jed's route is a declaration that he has always wanted to keep the main character entirely for himself, framed in the most unsettling possible way. His route contains not one but two separate double suicide endings, which she found genuinely alarming both times she played through them. She has absolutely no interest in revisiting that content from the inside. The afternoon winds down and Jed stands to leave. At the door he pauses and turns back to her with something on his face that looks like he is working up to saying something real. What comes out instead is a hesitant observation that she seems to really like bread. Fee recognizes that this is not what he actually wanted to say, but decides that the safer version of whatever is happening in his head is preferable to the accurate one. So she agrees warmly and tells him that her current ambition is to become a genuinely skilled baker. He seems to absorb this, says she is always welcome to visit, and leaves with an expression that has gone flat and a little gray, like the afternoon disappointed him in some way he cannot articulate. Fee closes the door, slides down against it, and sits on the floor for a moment. Later, washing dishes, she turns the whole visit over in her head and the pieces do not add up cleanly. Even falling for the heroine at first sight fits the logic of his character. Nicholas feeling responsible for what his brother set in motion makes complete sense given everything she knows about him. But Jed is different. For him to show up alone without an escort, without anyone knowing where he is, traveling all this way without a clear stated reason, and then nearly deliver the line that in the game only appears when the affection meter is already significantly elevated. None of that tracks with where things should be. The story should not be at that point yet. Nicholas cheerfully eating bread every week also does not quite fit his established character profile. She clatters the dishes a little harder than necessary and talks herself through it. This world is not a game. Everyone here is a real person making real choices, not a character running along a fixed track. She has been making choices that diverge from the original story since she arrived, missing every major plot beat on purpose, redirecting every significant moment. Of course, things are going to drift in unexpected directions. That does not mean the game's darker routes are activating around her. It just means people are people and today was a strange day. She stacks the last dish and decides firmly that it was not a flag. Meanwhile, inside the royal castle of the Cabot Kingdom, a princess stands with two soldiers who clearly have nowhere better to be. She points out that her brother-in-law has already left and that as his escort, they should probably be moving. One of the soldiers pivots the conversation entirely and tells her, with the particular boldness of someone who has decided this is their business, that she would do well to actually listen to what Prince Nicholas says to her, because the way things are going, she has no real shot against the woman she is competing with. The princess shuts that down immediately, making clear she did not ask for opinions from either of them or from her brother-in-law for that matter. Underneath the sharp exterior, she is not as composed as she sounds. She already knows she is falling short. She does not need someone else to hand her that conclusion because she arrived at it herself a long time ago. And sitting with it quietly is hard enough without people announcing it out loud. The soldier who spoke up tells her that he and his companion do not share Nicholas's apparent indifference toward her, and that if she ever needs support they are willing to offer it. The second soldier immediately tells the first to stop making commitments on behalf of both of them without checking first. The first soldier asks what the problem is and adds that the girl is clearly going through something difficult. The princess cuts across both of them and tells them flatly not to drag her into whatever this is, that she has no time for it, and walks away. Left alone, the two soldiers debrief. The second one explains patiently that walking up to someone who is permanently on edge and immediately attempting warmth is the kind of approach that backfires, which is what just happened. The first soldier absorbs this and then mentions, almost as a side note, that he was also thinking about telling her that Lady Rose is still alive. The second soldier turns to look at him and tells him with complete seriousness to keep that information to himself and to stop trying to make an already complicated situation more tangled than it needs to be. The first soldier agrees and adds that the only thing that really matters at the end of it all is the king anyway. Meanwhile, Fee is doing something far more straightforward, hauling flour. She stops at a warehouse she has clearly visited before, and the two workers inside greet her with the easy familiarity of people who have watched someone show up regularly and work hard without complaint. One of them tells her the 3 bags she ordered are ready. The other teases her a little, mentioning that she did not bring any sweets today, despite clearly knowing that flattery gets people things. Fee laughs and takes it well. The first worker offers her the card at no charge and tells her to make sure she comes back next time. She thanks him genuinely, and then her attention catches on something posted nearby. It is a notice about an engagement ceremony at the royal castle. One of the workers mentions her surprise that after the previous engagement fell apart so suddenly, a new one is already being announced. The whole thing moved fast. She also mentions, lowering her voice slightly, that from what she has heard the new arrangement between the prince and his fiancée is not going particularly smoothly. Fee goes quiet when she hears that. She thinks about what that means. She knows how the game plays out when the player chooses a route other than Seth's. In those paths, the prince and Liliana eventually reach a breaking point, and the truth about everything Liliana did comes out. Fee did not choose Seth's route. She chose no route. She exited the story entirely. But the consequences of that choice are still unfolding around her in ways she cannot fully control. She cannot step in directly either. Any move she makes toward Liliana right now would look like a disgraced former fiancé stirring up trouble, regardless of her actual intentions. The cleanest option is to go through Nicholas. She finds him not long after and opens with a question about the king, because asking directly about Liliana feels too pointed, and she needs to ease into it. Nicholas tells her his father is well and that he seemed genuinely relieved to hear Fee is doing fine, apparently even a little envious that Nicholas gets to see her while he does not. Fee is caught off guard by that. She sits with it for a moment longer than she intends to. During the engagement, she did not have many real opportunities to spend time with the king. Their social schedules did not overlap much, but what she saw of him was always kind. He treated her with warmth and a kind of dignified gentleness that the prince himself never quite managed. She realizes she has drifted and pulls herself back on track. She thinks through how to raise the subject of Liliana without making it sound like she is carrying a grudge, because that is exactly how it will sound if she phrases it wrong. She also needs to avoid any mention of Seth, because she spent considerable effort convincing Evan that she was still deeply in love with the prince, and if Nicholas picks up on the same impression, could create entirely new problems in a direction she does not want. She settles on asking about Liliana directly, and immediately regrets the phrasing the moment it leaves her mouth. Because asking about the woman who publicly humiliated her is not a neutral thing to do, and she knows it. She adds that she only asks because she understands from personal experience how difficult it is to step into that kind of position suddenly. Nicholas does not respond right away. When he does, all he offers is that Liliana appears to be physically fine. The pause before the answer and the flatness of it tell Fee that fine is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. After a beat, he admits that he has found himself feeling something close to sympathy toward Liliana lately, not because what she did was acceptable, but because it is becoming increasingly clear that conducting herself at the level the position demands is genuinely beyond her current abilities. He adds that she does not seem to be giving up, but that in his estimation it is only a matter of time. Fee does not take this calmly. She grabs his arm and tells him loudly that this is not something unique to Liliana, that virtually anyone dropped into that role without years of preparation would struggle, and that struggling is not the same as failing permanently. She catches herself and dials it back, then makes the actual argument she came to make. Liliana had real qualities before any of this happened. With proper training and genuine support, she can absolutely grow into the position. What she needs is not an audience waiting for her to collapse, but people who are actively invested in helping her succeed. She looks at Nicholas and tells him that is what she needs him to be. He looks at her steadily and says nothing for a moment. She pushes further and asks if he already knew that she was never quite as exceptional as her reputation suggested. That the image of Lady Rose was something she constructed deliberately over years to cover the gaps in her actual abilities. He confirms that yes, he had worked that out some time ago. And then something shifts in his expression. He goes quiet in a way that is different from his usual composure, more like something has just rearranged itself in his thinking. He says half to himself that it cannot be, and then that perhaps it is, and then looks at her and asks whether she is aware of something, some specific thing he is turning over in his head, and whether she understands what it actually means. Fee asks what he is referring to. He tells her he cannot say it, that if she genuinely does not understand, then her not understanding is actually more useful to him, which is possibly the most frustrating thing anyone has said to her in recent memory. She presses him. He apologizes and holds firm. She leaves the conversation more unsettled than she arrived and eventually just tells him plainly to give Liliana a fair chance going forward. He agrees immediately, saying that anyone she thinks so highly of must have genuine qualities worth investing in, and that he will approach her with the same open mind he once extended to Fi. That night, Fee makes her bed and lies down thinking about what he said. Something in his manner shifted after she told him about her acting, about how the Lady Rose everyone knew was a performance built on top of someone quite ordinary. He had what looked like a genuine realization, and then he locked it away and refused to share it, and now it is sitting in her head taking up space she would rather use for something else. She stares at the ceiling for a while and then something occurs to her. She sits up slightly, says out loud that she has figured it out, and then immediately decides she does not want to know what she has figured out, lies back down and closes her eyes. Whatever Nicholas understood in that moment, she is not a genius. She came into this life with memories, not additional intelligence. And there are things her regular brain simply cannot work through no matter how long she sits with them. If she cannot figure it out, spending the night chasing it is pointless. She is better off going to sleep and continuing to do her job well tomorrow. That is the part of her life she can actually control. She is asleep within minutes. One morning, Fee passes through the garden on her way out and the gardener, Pamela, calls after her asking where she is headed. Fi tells her she is going to the dairy shop, Tony's farm. Pamela remarks that the distance is quite a trek. Fee waves this off cheerfully and thinks to herself that by now she knows this town well enough to navigate it without thinking, which is exactly the kind of thing she never imagined being proud of back when she had servants handling every errand. Pamela tosses a teasing comment after her about how her noble boyfriend is not accompanying her today. Fee laughs it off and keeps walking, though somewhere in the back of her mind she acknowledges that Nicholas's habit of showing up is something she is going to have to figure out eventually. She thinks about it as she walks. This world has no photographs, no newspapers in any meaningful sense, no way for an ordinary person to recognize a royal face unless they have seen it in person. Nicholas does not move through the town with any fanfare, and the people around her have no reason to connect him to the palace. To them he probably reads as a well-dressed nobleman with a habit of buying leftover bread. which is the kind of quiet, slightly eccentric detail that people in a small town absorb and then mostly stop thinking about. The anonymity works in his favor and by extension in hers. She spots the landmark she is looking for, a church that sits just ahead of the dairy. From the outside, it has the shape and character of a place of worship from her previous life, the kind of architecture she associates with a certain kind of quiet and ceremony. But the religious structure of this world is not quite what she remembers. The people who wear the religious garments here are not nuns in the way she understood nuns. The rules and implications are different. The atmosphere is different. She is still thinking about this when a figure in those garments descends the church steps, misses her footing on the last one, and pitches forward directly toward the ground. Fee reacts without thinking and the woman lands against her instead of the stone. It hurts. Fee is fairly sure her side is going to bruise. The nun is immediately horrified and drops into a deep bow before Fee has finished registering what happened. Fee tells her to please stand up and asks if she is all right. The nun confirms she is unhurt and asks the same in return. And when Fee says she is fine, the nun apologizes again anyway. And then once more after that. Fee tells her the apology is accepted and means it, but the nun continues in the same vein, eventually looking up at Fee with wide eyes and saying that she only stopped to look because she has never seen anyone who resembles the saintess quite so closely, and then apologizing for staring as well. Fee finds her completely disarming. There is something about someone who reflexively puts themselves down while lifting everyone else up that reads less as low self-esteem and more as a very specific kind of personality, one that is genuinely oriented outward. She thanks the nun for the compliment and the nun immediately begins to deflect it, which Fee cuts through by introducing herself and asking the nun's name. The answer is Nancy. Fee turns the name over and thinks that Nancy has the energy of someone whose friends would shorten it to something rounder and softer. Nana, maybe, the kind of nickname that fits a person who trips on church steps and then apologizes to the person who caught her. She tells Nancy she has errands to finish, but that she would genuinely enjoy talking with her again sometime. Nancy says it would be an honor, which Fee takes as a yes. She leaves for the dairy and spends the walk there in a state of quiet delight. She thinks about the fact that this is the first person in this entire world she has connected with based on nothing except genuine mutual warmth. Her previous social life was constructed entirely on status. Every relationship she had as Felicia was filtered through rank, obligation, or politics. Even the people who were kind to her were kind to the position as much as to the person. Nancy does not know who she was. Nancy only knows who bumped into her on the steps, and she liked that person anyway. Fee is more pleased about this than she can reasonably explain. 3 days later, a carriage she does not recognize pulls up near the church, and Fee files the observation away without dwelling on it. It is her day off. Pamela spots her heading out and comments that she does not have the usual listless expression she wears on days when she is not working. Fee tells her it is because today she has somewhere to be, and thinks to herself that having a friend to visit is a genuinely different feeling from having free time with nothing to fill it. She thinks about the church as she walks toward it. The one in this world operates differently from anything she knew before. It is not a place people come to confess or to sit with heavy things. The atmosphere is lighter and more communal than that. Priests and nuns here are people who have chosen to deepen their own understanding of something larger than themselves and build their lives around that pursuit, which gives the place a different kind of weight, more like a home than an institution. Her own family observed certain traditions around gratitude to God in a relatively casual way. She grew up with the practice without ever examining it too closely. She arrives at the church and notices the carriage again parked outside. For a moment, something about it makes her think of Nicholas, but the crest is unfamiliar and she lets it go. She has been aware lately that he has pulled back slightly on how often he visits, and she thinks that is probably for the best. The more distance between her daily life and anything connected to the palace, the better. She steps inside. Nancy is standing with a man. The moment Nancy sees Fee, her face lights up, and she immediately raises her voice and her hand to point, announcing to the man that this is the noble lady who helped her, the one who looks like the saintess. The man tells her quietly and with practiced patience to please lower her voice and not point at people. Nancy apologizes and goes still. Fee watches this exchange and reads the dynamic between them instantly. He is calm where she is expressive, measured where she moves in sudden bursts. They fit together the way people do when they have been balancing each other out for a long time. The man introduces himself as Jack, the pastor of the church, and thanks Fee for catching Nancy before she hit the ground. Up close, he carries himself with the kind of settled composure that Fee associates with someone who has thought carefully about how to move through the world. Nancy chimes in to tell Fee that if she had come a little earlier, she would have been able to meet the Saintess. Fee catches the word and turns it over. A Saintess is not a game class. She is fairly sure of that much, but she is also not entirely sure what it does mean in this context. Jack clarifies before she has to ask, explaining that it is not a formal title, that it is simply what the people of the church have chosen to call her out of their own genuine feeling. Nancy adds that she became a nun largely because of this person, and offers to explain. The story goes back 13 years. Nancy was young, the same age as the girl she saw stepping out of a carriage in front of the church one morning. Curiosity made her follow. What she found was a girl kneeling before God in a way that stopped Nancy where she stood. There was something in the quality of that prayer, the complete sincerity of it, that Nancy has never forgotten in all the years since. Jack adds that beyond that single moment, the Saintess has come to the church to give her thanks every single month without exception, which in a world where most people only visit at turning points in their lives is quietly extraordinary. Fee does the arithmetic. If Nancy was the same age as the girl and Nancy appears to be around Fee's age now, the Saintess would have been roughly 3 years old when this happened. 3 years old, arriving by carriage, which means she comes from money, and she was already choosing to come to a small rural church and mean it. Fee thinks that is either the most genuinely devout thing she has ever heard or the most interesting person she has never met, possibly both. She catches herself getting drawn in and refocuses, because she did not come here to discuss the Saintess. She turns to Nancy and says she actually came with something to ask her. Nancy's face immediately cycles through several expressions in quick succession, landing on guilt, and she asks in a small voice whether Fee was injured the other day and needs money for medical fees, because if so, she is so sorry and please could she perhaps borrow some in advance. Jack reaches over and gently redirects her. Nancy subsides. Fee watches the two of them and thinks that if she had grown up inside something like this, surrounded by people who genuinely care about each other in a warm and slightly chaotic way, she might never have wanted to leave. But that is a pointless line of thinking. Whatever her surroundings had been, the shape of this world's story would have eventually pushed her toward the same fight. She got out. She is building something now with her own hands and her own choices. She extends her hand toward Nancy and asks her directly if she will be her friend. Nancy takes a moment. Then her whole face opens up and she says yes. Fee thinks, with a satisfaction she cannot entirely keep off her face, that this is it. Her first real friend in this world, claimed fair and square. She already has plans. They will spend time together, build something real between them gradually, and eventually Nancy is going to be completely devoted to her. Not romantically, obviously. But nobody is getting in the way of her goals. Next day, Fee is deep in her work at the bakery when Michelle drifts toward the window and mentions that she can see Nicholas's carriage outside. Fee moves to look and notices that it has been a while since his last visit. Michelle says as much, that she has been wondering about him. Fee thinks privately that he did exactly what he said he would, pulling back on how often he comes by, and that his absence is almost certainly connected to whatever he is doing regarding Liliana behind the scenes. She does not say any of this out loud. Her mind drifts further while she stands there. She thinks about the sequence of priorities that got her to this point. The first was researching what it actually takes to live as a commoner, practically and socially, before she ever needed to do it. The second was engineering the end of her engagement and her removal from her family in a way that landed her exactly where she intended. Both of those worked. The third priority, the one that matters now, is staying here. Everything she built depends on this part holding. If the story pulls her back in, if fate or circumstance or someone else's decision tries to drag her back into the game's original narrative, she will not fight it from inside. She will leave the country entirely if she has to. She has thought about this seriously. There is danger beyond the borders of everything she knows, possibly the kind that does not come back from, but a life that is not genuinely hers is not a life worth the effort of maintaining. She would rather face the unknown outside than perform indefinitely inside. Michelle's voice cuts through all of this. She tells Fee to stop standing there staring at nothing, takes the basket from her hands before Fee has processed what is happening, and physically propels her toward the door. Fee finds herself outside before she has decided to be, slightly mortified by how efficiently that was managed. From behind the closed door, Michelle calls out that she should be careful not to be too cold toward him, or she risks putting him off entirely. Fee thinks that putting him off entirely would actually be ideal, but she has learned not to say that part out loud. She approaches the carriage and stops. It is not the one she recognizes. Someone steps out and Fee takes one look at him and thinks, with a composure she has had some time to prepare, that he finally showed up. He greets her pleasantly and she greets him back. His name is Merwin, Mel to anyone close enough to use it, and he is one of the capture targets from Lady Rose. He suggests they walk while they talk, partly to keep the conversation away from the shop and anyone nearby. She agrees and they fall into step. He opens by saying that the idea of Lady Rose herself living as an ordinary commoner is genuinely difficult to picture. She thinks about the subordinates he brought with him and notes privately that unlike Nicholas's guards, who have long since made peace with their prince's eccentric bread habit, these ones look like they are still actively processing the situation. Merwin says he heard the story and found it so compelling that he came without quite deciding to. The way a person moves toward something interesting before their rational mind catches up. Fi tells him she can only imagine the inconvenience that caused his staff. He takes that well. Then he says something that is more direct. He tells her that he has been thinking about this since they were last in the same room together at a social gathering, and that she does not seem unsettled by any of it at all. She tells him that showing any sign of being rattled would just hand other people something to use against her. He seems to find this answer interesting. She thinks about what she actually knows about him. 2 months ago they were classmates at the same school, but their connection never extended beyond that structural proximity. There was no real relationship between them, which is exactly why his presence here requires an explanation that goes beyond curiosity. Jed coming makes a kind of sense. He is her former stepbrother. Nicholas coming makes sense. He is bound up in the situation by blood and by character. But Merwin has no personal stake. He comes from the Cavett family, the most powerful banking house in the country, people who maintain networks of information that flow in and out of the kingdom's most significant spaces. His family's business is knowing things. His personal nature is one of bottomless curiosity about human behavior, specifically the kind that does not follow the expected pattern. A girl who was considered the ideal future queen, who was publicly accused of bullying a classmate, had her engagement dissolved, was cast out by her own family, and then simply vanished into commoner life without complaint. That is the kind of story that would not let someone like him rest. He confirms this almost immediately. He tells her directly that Lady Rose, the girl who was placed under her family's authority after her demotion, is somehow living freely as a commoner without touching a single coin of the settlement money her parents provided. He asks if she is aware that he looked into her personal finances. She asks back whether he actually did that. He says yes because he wanted to know. She takes this in. The phrase he used under house arrest is interesting. He has done enough digging to understand that her life as a noble was not the gilded picture it appeared to be from the outside. As for the settlement money, she has not touched it and does not intend to. Taking it would mean remaining in her parents' debt in a way she is not willing to accept. She got lucky when she arrived in this town. Michelle hired her, the work suited her, the leftover bread kept her fed through the early weeks when her income was barely enough to cover rent. She built something stable out of circumstances that had no reason to be kind to her, and she did it without leaning on anything her family provided. Merwin tells her that in all his experience he has never come across anyone quite like her, and that he does not think he is going to be able to get the real story out of her through direct questioning. She tells him that coming from someone like him, that is a significant compliment. He tells her not to be clever with him. He explains that his investigation began with the Liliana situation, which he initially thought was a contained mystery, but every answer he found opened onto more questions, and eventually he accepted that the mystery was not going to resolve itself and let it go. He is telling her this, she understands, because he wants her to know the shape of what he knows without revealing exactly how much of it is accurate. She thinks about what move makes sense here. She is no longer a noble and has no intention of going back. Performing the Lady Rose version of herself is something she has done for so long that it costs her almost nothing anymore. It is as natural as breathing. The situation with Jed a few weeks ago was messy only because it came without warning. With Merwin she has had time to see him coming, and a prepared performance is a clean one. But there is also the question of what she can get out of this exchange, because information does not only flow in one direction, and Merwin's family sits at the center of more useful knowledge than almost anyone else in the kingdom. She tells him she wants to make a deal. She thinks, as she says it, about what comes next. how much she can maneuver from here, how much of the story's momentum she can redirect with the right agreement, whether this is the moment where she stops reacting to what the game throws at her and starts actually shaping what happens instead. It feels like a hinge point, the kind where the outcome is not written yet, and everything depends on what she does in the next few minutes. They settle across from each other at Fee's place, and she lays out the structure of the exchange before either of them says anything else. One question, one answer, alternating. Vague non-answers that give nothing away are not permitted. If either of them genuinely cannot respond to something, they say so honestly and the other person adjusts their question. The deal closes when one side runs out of things to ask, at which point the remaining question from the other side still gets answered. He listens to all of this and asks, with mild amusement, whether she actually has that many things she wants to know from him. She tells him she has several, and that the answers will directly influence decisions she needs to make about where her life goes from here. She says it pleasantly with a smile which makes it land more seriously than if she had said it plainly. He adds one condition of his own before she can continue. Fabricated answers are banned. She agrees. Then she produces a document, sets it on the table between them, and tells him this is her signed copy and slides a pen toward him. He looks at the paper with genuine surprise and asks whether she is really taking it this far. She tells him that if he finds that objectionable, there is nothing more to discuss. He tells her to wait. He picks up the contract, reads it, and then stops. He looks up at her and asks how his name is already written on it. She points out that he just used one of his questions, and that technically they have not yet established who asks first. He tells her that is not how this works. She tells him this is a good chance to start asking something valuable instead of stalling. He calls her insufferable, picks up the pen, and signs it. He asks if she will accept it as a memorandum rather than a binding legal document. She thanks him and tells him that is perfectly acceptable, while thinking privately that she did not actually expect him to sign without more resistance. She offers him the first question as a courtesy. He takes it and goes straight to the point, asking what her thinking was when she chose not to contest Seth ending the engagement, given that disputing it would have been entirely within her rights. She tells him the honest version of a carefully selected truth, that she had no reason to oppose it because she had always wanted it to happen, and that it seemed like the most convenient outcome for everyone involved. He takes a moment before responding. He tells her that the answer is significantly different from what he anticipated, enough that it genuinely surprises him. She asks, framing it as an optional addition rather than a formal question, what he had expected. He tells her it is fine to count it as a question and answer, saying only that he is different from her, which tells her almost nothing while somehow communicating quite a lot. She thinks about the fact that every time she opens her mouth in this conversation, she can feel his assessment of her shifting, recalibrating, moving in a direction she cannot fully read. In the game, she always found his character fascinating. In person, the experience is somewhat more uncomfortable. She uses her free information to ask what her behavior looked like from the outside during all of this. He tells her that midway through his investigation, he had concluded that she accepted the broken engagement deliberately, as the first move in something larger, something done for the country or for a specific person or out of some calculated long-term interest. Fee absorbs this and feels the floor tilt slightly under her assumptions. Her quiet, intentional exit from nobility potentially read, to an outside observer as sharp as Merwin, as the opening of a political maneuver. She thinks about Nicholas and his habit of visiting, and wonders for the first time whether those visits were partly about watching her, figuring out whether she posed any kind of threat. The misunderstanding Nicholas mentioned surfaces in her memory and suddenly has a different possible shape. She files all of this away and keeps her face still. She takes her first formal question and asks whether he believes Liliana can genuinely grow into the role of queen going forward. He pauses, seems to weigh something internally, and then says that yes, he believes she can. Fee exhales quietly inside her head. He continues, laying out his reasoning. The speed of the transition from one engagement to the next was unusual enough to draw attention, but Liliana's underlying qualities are real. Academically, she has always been near the top. She is disciplined, she works hard, and if the situation with the previous engagement is set aside entirely, there is no substantial objection to her as a candidate for the role. Her abilities are not in question. Fee gives him a standing ovation inside her own mind. This is the first time she has heard anyone speak about Liliana with genuine analytical fairness, rather than either defending her or tearing her apart. And hearing it laid out like that clarifies something she has always known but rarely had confirmed externally. Liliana is sharp, driven, widely connected, socially capable, and genuinely invested in Seth in a way that Fee never was and never pretended to be in her own head. The one-sided animosity Liliana directed at her always struck Fee as disproportionate, but it came from a real place. She wanted something and she saw Fee as the obstacle. Now the obstacle is gone, and what remains is someone who is actually suited to what she wanted. Fee thinks that is a reasonably good outcome for everyone, including Seth, whose company she is finding easier to tolerate now that she no longer has to share a room with him. He asks if that answer is sufficient. She confirms it is and tells him the exchange can continue. He takes his second question and shifts direction entirely. He tells her she has been misrepresenting her own abilities and asks why. Fee says the question is too broad and asks him to be more specific. Internally, she is reminding herself to stay level, because he is sharper than almost anyone she has encountered and panic will not help her. She also reminds herself that even if he exposes something, he has no possible access to the truth about her previous life. That information is safe by default. He explains that he traced her educational history back to early childhood, speaking with tutors from across the years. What he found was a pattern. As a very young child, before any performance level had been established, she was exceptional across multiple subjects: mathematics, language, logic. The tutors hired for that stage could not keep up with her and were replaced with specialists. But then, gradually and consistently, her performance declined until it settled into something that read as above average but unremarkable. He tells her his interpretation. The first tutor to assess her was doing exactly that, assessing, asking probing questions to establish a baseline. At that point, she did not yet know what normal looked like in this context, so some of her answers were genuinely exceptional, because she had no reference for what she was supposed to suppress. Once she understood the average, she calibrated down and maintained that level from then on. Fei thinks about how thoroughly he has reconstructed something she was completely certain no one would ever notice. The games world does not concern itself with academic standards or educational history. That detail simply does not exist in Lady Rose's narrative. So she answered those early tutors based on the standards of her previous life, which turned out to be considerably higher than what this world considers normal, and that gap left a trace that someone sufficiently motivated found years later. She answers his question. She tells him that her parents valued her in direct proportion to her usefulness, and that being too capable was as dangerous as being useless in that household. A child who is genuinely exceptional becomes a resource to be maximized, deployed, and eventually exhausted. A child who is merely functional gets managed but not consumed. She calibrated herself to the level where she would be maintained but not exploited, and she held that level deliberately from the moment she understood it was necessary. She adds that she could have developed into something more, and she knows it, but that person was not who she wanted to be. He tells her the answer is mostly within what he expected, but that there is a contradiction in it. She waits. He points out that in her first answer she said the broken engagement was convenient for everyone, implying she included herself in that, essentially choosing to be discarded. But the story she just told is about a person who managed herself carefully, specifically to avoid being thrown away. The two positions do not sit comfortably next to each other. She thinks for exactly 1 second and then responds. She tells him that being thrown away is not a single thing. There is a version of disposal that is destructive and a version that is deliberate and chosen. She was never going to allow the first kind. What happened with the engagement was the second kind, which she arranged herself, on her terms, at a time of her choosing. The outcomes that followed, including standing in her own small house across from him right now, she considers those to be fortunate rather than punishing. There is no lie in that, she means it completely. He watches her and she watches him watch her, and after a moment he seems to accept it. He asks one more thing, framed as simple curiosity outside the formal structure of their exchange. He asks what method she used for her own disposal. She tells him she supposes she qualifies as the kind of refuse that cannot be incinerated and has not been handed off to anyone else, and that since she is currently employed and paying taxes, she is at minimum legal. She adds that her parents probably did not anticipate that what they discarded would turn out to be capable of sustaining itself. She thinks to herself that oversized item might be more accurate than standard trash in her case, though the concept does not really exist in this world's vocabulary. he says he sees, and the conversation settles into a brief pause. Fee takes a slow breath and thinks about what has been asked so far and what is still ahead. She has held her ground. She has given him truth that is real but selected, enough to satisfy the contract without handing him anything she cannot afford to lose. She is doing well, she thinks. What she does not know yet is that he has one more question forming somewhere behind those sharp, unhurried eyes, and when he eventually asks it, it is going to reach past every layer of performance she has built and find something much closer to the center of her than she is currently prepared for. And while planning her escape from noble life, Fee expects the conversation with Merwin. She has two important questions: whether Seth has been acting differently in Liliana's current standing in high society. The reason these two questions matter is straightforward. If she can assess how much her choices have bent the original story, she can figure out what risk she is still carrying. If the plot has shifted significantly from the game's original direction, she needs to seriously consider putting more physical distance between herself and everything connected to it, possibly leaving the country entirely. If her interference only created small ripples that the story has mostly absorbed without changing its fundamental shape, then Liliana is well on her way to becoming exactly the queen she was always meant to be in the routes where the heroine steps aside. Either outcome is workable, but she needs to know which one she is dealing with. There is also the side issue of being suspected as a political threat. That possibility has been sitting in the back of her mind since Merwin's earlier answer suggested her behavior reads as calculated and purposeful to outside observers. Even if that suspicion grows Nika-sama is close enough to the situation that clearing her name would not take long, she is not particularly worried about that part. What she does want, quietly and without making too much of it, is the chance to actually fall in love someday on her own terms as a commoner without any of this game's architecture getting in the way. Before anything else, Fee brings up Jed and asks Merwin how her former stepbrother is doing. Merwin's response is a flat expression and a single-word request for clarification. Fee is not confused by the question. She is asking a very specific thing and he understands perfectly well what it is. She holds her position and repeats that she is serious and simply wants to know whether anything concerning has developed on Jed's end since his visit. Merwin then asks why she is not asking about Nika-sama instead. The question catches her off guard. She wonders what is behind it. She thinks about whether Merwin has a personal problem with Nika-sama or whether he is assuming she has feelings for him that she does not have. She thinks it through quickly. Since the engagement ended, Nika-sama has been the most visible thread connecting events, present in one way or another throughout. Liliana is now the royal family's choice to step into the role Fee vacated, a position with real opposition from those dissatisfied with the transition. Nika-sama is almost certainly aware of this. Merwin probably knows about Nika-sama's feelings toward Liliana and may worry that those feelings could make Liliana's life harder than it needs to be. But Fee already has that covered. She made Nika-sama promise to look after Liliana with an open mind and he agreed. She knows from both the game and years of personal observation that Nika-sama does not break his word. That is simply not who he is. So whatever concern Merwin might have on that front, Fee is not carrying it. That particular worry is already resolved and she trusts the resolution completely. Merwin answers her question about Jed without much resistance. He mentions that his research into Fee naturally pulled Jed into the picture as well. What he found is that Jed carries an inferiority complex that runs deep. This makes sense given that he has no blood connection to the family he was adopted into and therefore no natural footing to stand on. At the same time, he holds significant respect for Fee, which creates internal tension that he manages by keeping everything locked down. His expressions are controlled and his voice is flat. The emotional reality beneath both has been carefully hidden for so long that it has become second nature. Fee recognizes all of this immediately because it matches exactly what the game showed her about him. The more Merwin talks, the more convinced she becomes that Jed has been carrying those feelings for years without ever allowing them to surface properly. Someone like him would rather quietly endure emotional conflict forever than risk exposing weakness in front of others. Merwin notes that Jed has loosened up lately. His expressions are less guarded and sometimes distant, which others find charming, and that has increased his popularity. Fee realizes that when she threw bread at him, his image of her shattered. He likely focuses now on himself role as Suwaro's heir. The faraway look suggests he is considering his own future rather than hers. Instead of revolving entirely around Fee the way he once did, he finally seems to be building an identity that exists separately from her influence, and that realization feels almost unreal to her. Fee acknowledges she might be optimistic, but it fits. Merwin confirms that Jed's academic performance and social status are steady with nothing else notable. Everything is fine. Fee is elated that she ended a yandere route with leftover bread. Her eyes water and Merwin notes her happiness. She wipes her face and calls it a natural sibling reaction. He says he will not cry over it. She suspects he is slightly sour and moves on. Even so, relief continues washing through her in waves because for the first time since arriving, this World 1 disaster route truly seems to have closed for good. Merwin reminds her that she used her last turn, so now it is his. He would prefer 2 more but sticks to the rules, which Fee finds endearing. He frames his last question. Based on what she told him, he sees someone living freely because she engineered her own demotion. He presents this as a confirmed conclusion and not a mere question. Fa mentally gives him full marks. In a world where commoner demotion is nearly a death sentence for aristocracy, understanding her choice means Merwin truly sees her. Then he asks the actual question. He wants to know why, given everything she is capable of. She did not simply pursue happiness within the aristocracy, it would have been easier. The resources were already there. She knows at once this is the question he has saved. It cuts through everything else they have discussed and touches something she avoids facing. To answer honestly is to confront what she prefers not to. The unfulfilled dreams she carries in memories of a former life and reminders of what she still lacks. She breathes in and breathes out and answers. She tells him that no amount of comfort or affection among aristocrats would make her happy. Not because those things are worthless. They just cannot give her what she truly wants. Even if she had lived as Lady Rose with all the luxuries and love, she would still choose this path. Dying as a commoner feels more alive than surviving as Lady Rose ever did. He admits he does not understand her. It sounds like a spoiled noble romanticizing freedom, a kind of foolishness. Fee agrees that she was that girl, but she followed through, and that is what separates wanting from doing. He has no response. He tells her that her existence is genuinely remarkable, enough to satisfy even his curiosity, which he rarely admits. He seems slightly deflated as he says it, like someone reaching the end of an interesting problem and realizing it is over. She tells him there is no reason to look so gloomy. He cannot be expected to fully follow her reasoning since the framework behind it, the game she knew in her previous life, is beyond his reach. She cannot explain that part. She can only show him the conclusions it led her to. He stands and thanks her for her time, and she thanks him for his. He moves toward the door and she glances around the room, noticing she has nothing to offer him on his way out. She was pushed out of the bakery for this meeting specifically because it needed to stay quiet, which means no bread, and she finds that mildly regrettable. She thinks about how much Nika-sama enjoys Michelle's bread and how a single piece of it sent Jed's entire route collapsing. There is something almost funny about the fact that bread keeps being the most consequential item in her life. At the door, Merwin pauses and turns back. He tells her that fighting against fate and against the country and against forces larger than any single person is a serious undertaking. He also acknowledges that somewhere during their conversation he probably said things that were not particularly kind. What he is trying to say in his roundabout way is that she should keep going. She should win. Fi thinks about the fact that she has never said any of this to another person before. Most people would hear it and decide she is strange. Merwin heard it and told her to keep fighting, which is exactly what she needed without knowing she needed it. She thanks him sincerely and tells him she fully intends to win. He leaves. She closes the door behind him and stands there for a second. She thinks his character in the game always reads as blunt and self-interested, but sitting across from him that day he kept drifting into something warmer and more encouraging than that profile suggests. Maybe the game undersold him. Maybe people are more than their labels. She takes about 2 steps before her legs give out slightly and she catches herself on the wash basin. She announces to nobody that she is exhausted. She runs a bath and climbs in and lets herself decompress. She got every answer she came for. Merwin is not the type to share what was said there, so none of it is going to surface anywhere inconvenient. By any measure, this was a success. If her commoner life had simply continued without this conversation ever happening, that would have been the ideal outcome. But given that it did, she handled it well. She gets into bed and lies there thinking about her dreams, the ones she mentioned to him without naming them directly. She knows they are not going to come true anytime soon. She knows that every time she speaks them aloud or even traces their shape in her mind, she brushes up against the same hopelessness she carried in her previous life. The feeling of wanting something that the world she is in simply does not have room for. She is not ready to sit with that tonight. She closes her eyes and thinks just a little longer and just a bit more. She has to keep going. She has to stay a commoner. As the carriage moves through the road, Nicholas quietly thinks about Fee. An entire week passes since he last sees her, and despite trying to reassure himself that she is probably fine, uneasiness still lingers in his chest. He knows better than anyone that Fee always forces herself to stay strong no matter where she goes. Because of that, she rarely depends on others, especially him. Thinking back on the past only deepens his frustration. Even during her engagement, she never once confides in him about why she accepts it. Until recently, he also has no idea that Liliana bullies her all this time. Fee keeps everything to herself until the very end, then suddenly disappears without explaining anything at all. Part of him wants to visit her personally, but he also understands that she is finally living peacefully as a commoner now. Interfering carelessly might only ruin that life for her. Even so, something about the entire situation still feels unnatural to him. Despite those doubts, he is honestly relieved that she seems to be doing well. At the same time, he cannot stop wishing she would rely on him a little more. He always believes she sees him as a dependable older brother figure, yet somehow she never leans on him when it truly matters. That thought suddenly reminds him of a conversation from the past. He remembers his father calmly informing him about future plans, only for those words to leave him completely shaken. Back in the present, Nicholas quietly thinks that if he manages to endure over there, then she should also be able to endure here. At that moment, Liliana approaches him and brings up the topic of fate. She wonders whether fate can truly be changed. Nicholas admits that he does not know. To him, fate feels like something people interpret however they please. If their wishes come true, they praise fate as though it blesses them. If things go badly instead, then blaming fate becomes the easiest excuse. In the end, people simply twist events into whatever meaning benefits them most. Because of that, he finds it arrogant to believe fate controls everything. Even so, rather than continuing the discussion himself, he decides they should ask Fee instead. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Fee falls deep into memories from her previous life. Back then, she has an older brother who excels at everything. He is handsome and intelligent and talented and admired by everyone around him. No matter where he goes, people naturally gather around him because he always becomes the center of attention. Growing up beside someone like that shapes Fee's entire life. Whenever people speak to her, they always praise her brother first. They constantly tell her how lucky she is to have such an amazing older brother. Hearing those words over and over again gradually teaches her that her role is simply standing behind him. Because of that, she spends her entire childhood trying not to become a burden. She carefully watches her actions and suppresses her own feelings and constantly worries about inconveniencing him. People repeatedly warn her not to hold him back and not to upset him and not to interfere with his future. Over time, she starts living entirely around her brother instead of herself. Eventually, when she enters high school, she decides to live alone. She convinces herself that staying near him would only continue making his life harder, so she persuades her parents to allow it. Even then, her brother still visits her school and the house where she lives by herself. Since nobody is there to watch them anymore, the pressure only grows stronger in her mind. By the time she enters university, she becomes desperate to distance herself from him completely. She intentionally makes herself difficult to track down and uses every possible method to stay hidden. For the first time in her life, she finally feels free enough to be herself. Even if only briefly, she finally experiences happiness that belongs to her alone. Then, on what should have been an ordinary day, everything suddenly falls apart. She runs into her brother again unexpectedly. At first, she believes she has changed enough to ignore him now. She convinces herself that things will be different this time. However, the moment she actually sees him, all her old habits immediately return. Without thinking properly, she panics and runs away from the crowded street. In a rush, she gets hit by a car. That memory still crushes her completely. She blames herself for acting recklessly and impatiently. At the same time, she also hates how obedient and weak she becomes around her brother. She spends her whole life following the path others decide for her until she eventually turns into nothing more than a doll moving according to someone else's wishes. Even at the very end of her previous life, she never manages to overcome him. That regret continues haunting her after death itself. She hates the fact that fate constantly drags her around according to her brother and her family and everyone else's expectations. She spends her life acting according to a script that never truly belongs to her. Now, after being reborn into another world entirely, she refuses to become that kind of doll again. This time, her brother cannot overshadow her anymore. Still, rebirth also robs her of the chance to ever properly compete against him. Because of that, she eventually decides that instead of defeating her brother, she will defeat fate itself with her own strength. The overwhelming memories suddenly crash into her all at once. Unable to endure them calmly, she rushes into the bathroom and slams the door shut behind her. As nausea rises in her throat, she realizes the memories she loses after reincarnating finally return to her. Prince Seth's behavior earlier reminds her too strongly of the trauma from her previous life, which is exactly why she unconsciously avoids thinking too deeply about her brother all this time. Even though she remembers being reborn, she completely forgets the details surrounding her death until now. All this time, she desperately clings to the dream of becoming a peaceful commoner because it allows her to keep moving forward without looking back. She convinces herself that her previous life already ends and that only her current life matters now. Even so, she cannot fully erase the past no matter how hard she tries. Part of her wishes this entire world is only a dream. If that were true, she at least wishes it could have been a happier one. Unfortunately, her condition worsens to the point where she feels too unwell to work properly. Even so, she forces herself to think rationally. No matter how sick or emotionally unstable she becomes, she still needs to personally inform her workplace if she cannot come. Unlike her previous world, there are no phones here. Simply disappearing would make her look irresponsible and unreliable as an employee. Because of that, she forces herself to get ready anyway. At the very least, she wants to avoid causing problems for others. The next morning arrives quietly with birds chirping outside. As she walks through town, she notices how peaceful everything still feels around her. Realizing that endlessly drowning herself in misery will solve nothing, she slowly tries to calm down. For now, she decides she needs a new dream beyond simply becoming a commoner. With that thought in mind, she finally arrives at the bakery and meets Michelle and greets her good morning. As Fee rests, he observes her quietly and informs her that her complexion looks better than before. He still insists that she should stay in bed and rest properly for the day. He then adds that having a visitor around would make it difficult for her to rest, so he decides to leave. As he turns to go, Fee suddenly grabs his clothes. The moment lasts only briefly before she lets go again. She immediately becomes tense, thinking that the gesture might have been noticed. She worries that he might have realized she was holding onto him. He looks back at her, then silently places a blanket over her before finally sitting down again instead of leaving. Fee becomes even more confused by his behavior. She reflects that she always tries to maintain distance from him, so her earlier action feels completely out of character. Because of that, she decides she should explain herself properly since she already understands the reason behind it. Without delay, she pulls the blanket closer and begins speaking. She admits that she feels jealous of Seth. When he asks what she means, she continues by explaining that despite having everything, Seth never shows arrogance or looks down on others, and he treats people with kindness. Having a brother like that is something she always envies. As she speaks further, she realizes that her feelings connect deeply with memories from both her noble past and her previous life. She understands that she must have been carrying jealousy unconsciously without noticing it before. When she was still in the game world, she never fully realized it, but now that everything feels real, she clearly understands the bond between siblings that she always desired but never had. That warmth and affection becomes something she constantly longs for. Unable to hold it in, she admits through tears that she also wanted that kind of family bond. At the same time, she understands that this is only emotional weakness and nothing more. She cannot choose her brother, and that remains an unchangeable fact. Because of that, she already accepts her situation and chooses to live as a better version of herself instead of clinging to regret. She reminds herself that she already decides to fight against fate and live as a commoner. He suddenly responds by saying that even though they are not related by blood, he still sees her as his precious younger sister and asks if that is acceptable. Fee immediately rejects the idea in her heart. She reflects that he is kind to her and always treats her gently, but she still cannot accept him in that role. She replies that it is not acceptable, explaining that Nicholas remains Nicholas and no one can replace her real brother. She insists that she only has one older brother and that position cannot be replaced by anyone else. She internally acknowledges that even now her brother's presence continues to affect her deeply, and she still struggles to let go of him. She concludes that accepting another person as her brother would change nothing in her heart. Even though she wants to move forward, that boundary remains firm. He then changes the topic and asks whether she believes fate can be changed. The question unsettles her because she cannot tell whether it carries meaning beyond simple curiosity. She briefly wonders if it is some kind of philosophical thought or something more personal. Normally, she would respond casually and avoid serious reflection, but his expression makes her pause. Because of that, she answers more honestly instead of dismissing it. She explains that fate can be changed. To her, fate is not something fixed or sacred. It is simply a concept people use to justify outcomes. When things go well, they call it fate in a positive way. When things go badly, they use fate as an excuse. In her view, it is easier for people to interpret everything in a way that suits them rather than accept responsibility. She adds that she personally dislikes the idea of fate because it traps people into accepting suffering as something unavoidable. She refuses to believe that and instead wants to change her own future, even if it is difficult. He responds by saying that her answer sounds exactly like her usual self. Later, Fee reflects that she must have experienced another strange dream, like emotional collapse connected to her past life memories. She feels as if she momentarily drifts between past and present, mixing emotions that do not belong together. When she fully regains awareness, she realizes that she is still holding his hand. The moment she notices it, she greets him awkwardly while he also returns the greeting. Both of them remain holding hands for a short while in silence. Fui immediately feels overwhelmed internally and wishes she could lose consciousness again to escape the situation. She becomes mentally confused because she has too many things she wants to ask and no clear idea how to act. As he slowly begins to withdraw his hand, she quickly forces herself to recover. She decides to pretend nothing unusual happens and mentally prepares to reset the situation. However, instead of continuing the act, she suddenly sits up and apologizes. She explains that she holds his hand earlier without permission and that his kindness allows her to sleep peacefully. Because of that, she requests him not to indulge her behavior again in the future. She also cannot openly accept any punishment or consequences for her actions because doing so could expose too many hidden truths, including her connection to Liana and Seth. If that information spreads, her peaceful life as a commoner would end immediately. He questions why she is apologizing. Fee becomes internally frustrated, thinking that he should already understand the seriousness of the situation. She lowers her head and continues apologizing, explaining that she wastes his valuable time due to her selfishness. He quietly repeats her words about wasting time. She then notices the guard standing nearby and becomes more aware of the situation. She feels uneasy but also notices that the guard seems slightly annoyed, though she does not understand why. He tells her to raise her head and informs her that he comes because he wants to and he stays because he chooses to. He adds that he considers his time well spent. Fee agrees outwardly, but internally she feels overwhelmed by how considerate he is. She struggles with the urge to distance herself, yet at the same time feels unable to reject his kindness. Suddenly she notices him smiling. The sight confuses her and she internally questions why he smiles at her at a moment like this. He reminds her that she previously says she does not see him as an older brother. She realizes she does indeed say that earlier without thinking. She confirms it again, though she feels uneasy about it. She internally questions whether he is the type of person who punishes others in such a calm and indirect way. He then declares that they are friends. Fee immediately becomes uncertain and questions that statement internally. She struggles to understand whether someone of her position can truly be called a friend of a prince. From her perspective, it feels disrespectful, yet at the same time their relationship already seems to cross the line of simple acquaintances. Since she cannot fully deny it, she cautiously agrees. He smiles gently at her response. She becomes even more confused by his reaction, especially when he starts speaking again in a calm tone. He mentions something about his father and how she would be fine. Fee reacts internally with confusion, unable to understand the meaning behind his words. He continues speaking about obtaining the things he desires. Hearing that makes her uneasy. She interprets his words in multiple ways and begins overthinking their meaning, especially when combined with earlier discussions about power and influence. Before she can process further, he informs her that he will take his leave. He tells her to rest proper before leaving. After he departs, Fee remains sitting in silence, still mentally overwhelmed. Eventually, she decides to go see Nancy, thinking that what she needs right now is emotional comfort and relief for her mind. Our girl then makes her way to Nana, and the moment Nana looks at her face, she cuts straight to the point. She declares that whatever is going on with Fee is clearly a matter of love. Fee has no idea how the conversation arrived there that fast. She finds something genuinely charming about the way Nana's mind works, even when it lands completely off the mark. Nana has already heard that the person involved is somehow out of reach and immediately frames it as a painful love story across different social standings, enthusiastically offering herself as an advisor. Fee looks at her and thinks about the fact that Nana has just admitted in the same breath that she has zero personal experience in love, which makes the confidence behind that offer very difficult to explain. She sets the record straight. There is no lover, and there are no romantic feelings involved at all. The person is closer to a friend than anything else. Nana is not entirely convinced and starts to push further, but Fee cuts her off before she can finish the thought, pointing out that it is fairly rude to keep going down that road and redirecting the conversation toward Nana instead. Nana accepts the redirect, and Fee asks whether there is anyone Nana herself has feelings for. Nana answers without any hesitation that serving the Saintess comes before everything else for her. Fee accepts that and moves on internally, though she files it away as genuinely interesting. Nana comes from a noble family, which means the expectation around her was always to position herself well, compete for the attention of eligible men, and prove her purity and worth through the church from a young age. The standard path for noble girls. But choosing to retreat to such an isolated posting does not fit that mold at all. It raises the quiet question of whether the church was less about devotion and more about stepping away from it entirely. Nana then says that the two of them are very similar, and that is why she likes Fee so much. Fee registers that some people might bristle at a remark like that, but she genuinely does not mind it. Nana likes her. That is enough. She is her friend, so there is no issue. She does ask Nana to clarify whether she means they look similar or whether she is pointing at something else. Nana explains that while both Fee and the Saintess are beautiful, they feel different from each other. The Saintess has a soft, delicate beauty, while Fee carries something more striking. What Nana is actually pointing at is something beyond appearance. She tries to find the words for it, turning it over and spinning her finger as she thinks. And both Fee and the Saintess have a kind of upward-facing energy, an ambition and inner drive that pushes them toward their goals even when those goals feel out of reach. There is a nobility in that, a quiet strength, and Nana is proud of herself for articulating it. Fee listens and thinks about how ironic that reading is, because the drive Nana is picking up on was largely performance, and the particular advantage that came with being the heroine of the story she was living. Her actual goal was never grand, it was just to live quietly as a commoner. There was nothing noble about it. Nana adds that she genuinely believes Fee and the Saintess would get along if they ever met. Fee tells her to drop it. Privately, she thinks it is close to impossible anyway, because from everything she has observed, the Saintess and Seth are an almost perfectly matched pair. Beautiful and intimate, and exactly what people imagine when they picture two people who belong together. That is the surface reading at least, and Fee knows by now that surfaces do not always tell the full story. Nana then admits something more personal, that if Fi and the Saintess did grow close, she worries she would end up left behind, and that she is a little jealous of both of them for different reasons. Fee looks at her and feels a rush of genuine affection so strong that she thinks to herself that with someone like Nana around, she would not need anyone else for the next 10 years. Nana was her very first friend in this town, and that means something real to her. She tells Nana plainly that she is not going anywhere. Nana lights up with relief and says she is glad, and Fee watches her and thinks that if this kind of warmth and softness just naturally existed in the world, then maybe things would sort themselves out on their own. She thinks briefly about the Saintess and whether someone like her being close to Nana might actually be a good thing. And then remembers that if the country had been saved by that kind of gentle charm much earlier, a lot of the harder things would never have needed to happen at all. A week passes and life settles into something genuinely pleasant for Fee. Michelle compliments her instincts for baking. Nana stops by the shop regularly, and even the ingredient seller at the market is in a generous enough mood one day to give her a discount without being asked. It is a streak of small, uncomplicated good things, and Fee is aware of every single one of them. But underneath the ease, there is a quiet restlessness she cannot name. Nothing she can point to specifically, just a faint feeling that something is slightly off. That feeling snaps into focus the moment she freezes mid-step and finds Noran standing directly in front of her. He tells Zero that the rumor that Lady Rose actually became a commoner is true, and Zero responds that it is a relief that the information was not false. Fee stares at both of them. Noran is a prince from a neighboring country and Zero is his closest aide. Both of them have apparently traveled here without any official announcement, slipping out of their country in secret just to wander around. Noran calls her lucky. Fee does not share that reading of the situation. She quickly decides she did not hear a single word of the conversation before she noticed them and greets them with the most neutral expression she can muster. Noran steps closer and implies that she already knows what brought them here. She genuinely has no idea, but she is also not going to accidentally confirm anything she shouldn't know, so she says nothing and lets the ambiguity do its work. Her immediate internal fear is that they somehow found out she has been working since arriving in town, but she pushes that thought down and keeps her face still. Zero observes in his typically dry way that she is as unreadable as ever, and adds that if she had chosen to stay in her previous life, she had the kind of capability that could have made her a significant national asset. Fee takes that in and mentally places both of them in the framework she already knows. In the game, Noran and Zero were both capture targets. Zero's route was only unlocked after completing Noran's first. Noran is the kind of character who shifts registers easily, coming across as either a commanding, reliable older brother type or a loose, unpredictable younger one. He is genuinely open and willing to listen to anyone, which makes him likable but also unpredictable in a different way. Zero is cut from a different cloth entirely. He is one of the genius-type characters alongside Nika, but where Nika's intelligence serves broader purposes, Zero's is entirely focused on one thing, making Noran into the best possible king. Everything he does circles back to that singular purpose. Since becoming a commoner, Fee has now encountered every capture target except the one she internally refers to as the arrogant prince. And of all of them, these two are the pair she least wanted to cross paths with. Noran starts moving toward what sounds like an actual point, and Fee immediately cuts him off and redirects them. Standing in the open market having this conversation is not something she is willing to do. They came here without official authorization, and the last thing any of them needs is for Noran to be recognized in public. The fallout when they returned home would be significant. Zero agrees without much resistance, though he makes his feelings about roundabout approaches clear. The solution they land on is moving to her place, and Fee already has a sinking feeling about it before they even start walking. On the way there, Noran notices she has cut her hair and asks about it with the casual ease of someone who has no idea that the question could land badly. Fee thinks about how the same words directed at actual noblewomen who had just surrendered her status might have felt like a small deliberate cut. Noble women treat their hair as a marker of identity and effort. But Noran is not calculating anything. He is just someone who says what he notices without running it through a social filter first. He follows it up by saying he personally prefers short hair, and Fee registers that this is the kind of line that would mean something significant to the heroine in the game context. From where she is standing, it is just a comment. She tells him it suits her fine and leaves it there. She privately thinks that if she had arrived in this world without her past, life memories and was experiencing this as a genuine former noble trying to adjust, that comment about her hair would have stung in ways he would never have intended. That is just how he is. Honest to the point of occasionally walking straight into things without realizing it, but never cruel about it. By the time they reach her door, Noran looks around and apologizes for the size of the space, which Fee had already completely anticipated. Zero moves things forward and tells Noran to get to the actual purpose of the visit. They sit down, and Zero asks how much Fee knows about their country and then specifically whether she has any knowledge of the Girl of Prophecy. Fee had already suspected it was heading there. She keeps her answer minimal. She has heard of the rare revelations that sometimes come through church members, which is about as vague as she can make it. Zero confirms that is what he means, then draws a clear line between the usual kind of prophecy, the sort parents used to frighten children into behaving, and what their prophetess actually did. What she did was specific. She predicted a real national crisis and then, rather than delivering the warning through any dramatic or religious channel, she simply told this country's King Edward to share it publicly as though it were ordinary information. That detail lands heavily for Fee. That was exactly what she told the king to do. The fact that Zero knows that specific instruction narrows things down considerably, and she understands immediately that this conversation is not going where she hoped it might. The detail about the king troubles Fee immediately. The instruction she gave him, to release the prophecy publicly as though it were completely routine information rather than a divine warning, was something only the two of them should have known about in that level of specificity. The fact that Zero is referencing it now means the king shared details of that private conversation at some point, and Fee cannot work out why or why Zero is choosing to bring it up in this particular moment rather than any other. Zero keeps going and explains that because the warning reached King Edward when it did, he was able to identify the crisis early enough to organize assistance before it spiraled into something unmanageable. Hearing that pulls Fee into the broader picture she already carries in her head. The world she lives in was built on the bones of a game called Nation Savior Lady Rose, and the structure of that game is something she knows well. The title itself tells you the ending. no matter which romantic route the heroine pursued. The story always converged on the same crisis point near the end. A war would break out with Noran's country. The heroine would pick up on the warning signs before anyone else did, and depending on which route she was on, she would resolve it through different means: domestic policy, military maneuvering, diplomatic channels, and emerge from the other side having saved the country. That is where the name came from. But Fee is not a heroine running along a predetermined path with a clean resolution at the end. She is a real person living in a real version of that world, and she had to seriously consider what would actually happen if she simply refused to play the role the story had written for her. The war would not wrap itself up on its own. Without the heroine driving events toward a resolution, casualties would mount, the conflict would drag on longer than it did in any game route, and the outcome could be significantly worse than anything the original story depicted. She decided early on that she could not allow that, regardless of how much she wanted to stay out of it. The problem was figuring out how to prevent it without destroying the quiet commoner life she was trying to build. As a child, she had spent time gathering information directly about the neighboring country's internal situation, because she knew from the game that what was coming for them, a plague combined with catastrophic crop failures, would eventually push their leadership toward war as a last resort. But the neighboring country kept its information tightly locked down, and she came back with nothing useful. Going through official channels was not an option either. Walking into the palace with specific knowledge about another country's internal crisis with no credible explanation for how she came to have it would have drawn serious attention from both sides and put everything she was working toward at risk before she even got there. She sat with the problem long enough that she eventually arrived at what she privately considers one of the more absurd solutions she has ever come up with. She went to the king when she was 7 years old and delivered the warning as a prophecy. A 7-year-old girl stating with quiet specificity that an epidemic was going to strike a particular region of the neighboring country is strange enough on its surface that it might be waved off, but concrete enough that, if the prediction turned out to be accurate, someone would remember it and act. She did not need the king to believe her completely in the moment. She just needed the information to land somewhere it could be used. She kept the wording vague enough to avoid sounding as if she had access to classified intelligence, leaned into how disarming her age made her, and ensured the same essential information reached Nika and the arrogant prince through separate channels as a precaution. She never genuinely expected something that was loosely constructed to hold up, but it did hold up, and she moved forward. In the aftermath, Noran never transferred into the school the way the game said he would, and Zero never took up the teaching position that was supposed to bring him into her orbit. She took that as confirmation that she had navigated past both of them cleanly and without leaving anything behind that could be traced back to her. Zero tells her plainly that he is now fully convinced she was the prophetess. Fi does not respond. She already knew from the game that Zero had some degree of understanding about this, that it was not entirely outside his awareness. But her pride is not the only thing stopping her from confirming it out loud. Saying it explicitly means acknowledging that she is the person who stepped in and redirected the course of a potential war, and that kind of acknowledgement is the opposite of everything she has been carefully constructing for herself. These two showing up at all is already more disruption than she wanted. She is not going to hand them a confession on top of it. She thinks privately that whatever affection she has for them as game characters, in reality, they exist primarily as obstacles to the life she is trying to live, and the fact that they are her favorites among the capture targets does not change that calculation. What she actually wants is her comfort zone, and these two represent the clearest threat to it. Zero shifts direction almost without pausing and asks whether she has any kind of relationship with Liliana. Fee says no. The difference in their social standing made any meaningful connection between them essentially impossible, and there was never a natural reason for their paths to cross in a significant way. Zero acknowledges that and then mentions in the same unhurried tone that he passed along his thanks to Liliana for informing him about Fee's role as the prophetess. The bottom drops out of the conversation for Fee. Liliana knew she was the prophetess, and Liana chose to tell Zero and Noran. Fee turns that over rapidly, and the full shape of it assembles itself faster than she would like. Liliana is not someone who arrives at significant information by accident. If she knew about the prophecy, she had been working backward through everything Fee had ever done, mapping the timeline, identifying what each piece meant, and building a complete picture of who Fee actually is and what she has actually been responsible for. And then she deliberately chose to hand that picture to these two specifically, which means this visit was never a coincidence. The encounter in the market was not luck. They already knew where Fee was before they ever stepped off that carriage. Liliana gave them the location, she gave them the prophecy connection, and she almost certainly gave them everything else she had uncovered in the process. The fact that Noran and Zero came in person quietly, without going through any official diplomatic channel, means they wanted this conversation to exist outside of any record or oversight. And the worst possible interpretation of that they came here to eliminate the person who knows too much is not one Fee can dismiss. Noran is trained and armed. Zero is the kind of intelligent person that does not need physical force to be dangerous. She has no meaningful ability to defend herself. She is alone with both of them in her own home, and there is nobody who knows they are here. Even the timing now feels intentional to her. They arrived when the streets were quieter, when fewer people would notice unfamiliar faces moving through this part of the district, and when help would take longer to reach her even if she managed to call for it. Every detail lines up too neatly to ignore. The longer she thinks about it, the more obvious it becomes that this entire meeting had been arranged with precision long before she ever realized she was involved in it. Zero turns toward Noran and signals that it is time for the actual question. The deliberateness of that handoff. Zero stepping back and making sure the question comes from the prince directly already tells Fi that whatever is coming carries significant weight and has been framed carefully. Noran looks at her and asks whether she would like to join him in starting a war against this country. Quietly thinks back to Noran's route from the game. The man standing in front of her now feels almost identical to the Noran she remembers from Lady Rose. In the game, Noran appears friendly and easygoing despite being the prince of a foreign kingdom, but he always keeps a careful distance between himself and everyone else. Because of that guarded nature, the protagonist has to repeatedly visit the places he frequents before slowly becoming close to him. By the middle of his route, Noran eventually invites the protagonist to follow him once he begins a war. Remembering that scene immediately makes Fi uneasy because Noran gives her almost the exact same invitation now. The difference is that, unlike the game, they barely interact in this world. Because of that, she never expects things to progress this far. Trying to stay calm, she explains that she does not understand why he suddenly brings up such a dangerous topic and pretends she never hears him at all. Noran immediately points out that avoiding the subject only makes things more troublesome. From her reaction alone, he already realizes she expects something from them. Zero then admits that he originally assumed she intends to make use of Liliana, but now it seems she has another objective entirely. Their words immediately throw Fi into confusion. She starts wondering whether they suspect her of planning a rebellion against the kingdom. At the same time, if they believe she is using Lily, then maybe Lily is not sent to assassinate her after all. That thought briefly comforts her, but the relief quickly disappears, depending on how she interprets the phrase making use of. It is also possible they believe she manipulates Lily to lure them here. Once she looks at it from that angle, the possibility of Lily still being an assassin cannot be completely dismissed. Noran then changes his approach and offers her a deal instead. He explains that he is willing to grant any wish she desires as long as she cooperates with them. Hearing that instantly reminds Fi of the protagonist again because Noran once says the exact same thing during his route. She struggles to remember the protagonist's response before finally recalling it. Back then, the protagonist speaks about having a wish worth sacrificing everything for, yet Noran in his current state is incapable of granting it. Unfortunately, that memory provides Fi with absolutely no help. She could never bring herself to repeat such embarrassing lines. Besides, the protagonist's wish ultimately revolves around love while Fi's own wish is defeating fate itself. Noran has no power to grant something like that. Zero calmly explains that following Noran would not be a bad option for her. In his eyes, she could take revenge against Prince Seth and the kingdom that abandons her while also gaining wealth, status, and glory. Fi instantly rejects the idea internally. She already throws away those desires long ago. As the pressure around her grows heavier, she begins desperately sorting through her options. Refusing them outright feels dangerous because people involved in something this serious would never allow her to walk away freely. She fears they might silence her permanently. Trying to talk her way out feels impossible because Zero is far too intelligent to be fooled with shallow excuses, and Noran would likely trust his judgment. Pretending to agree before escaping also sounds hopeless. Nikala is already watching her closely, so suddenly disappearing after secretly meeting important people from another kingdom would immediately raise suspicion. Once the truth comes out, she would be labeled a dangerous rebel and destroyed before she could explain herself. Realizing every possible choice ends badly makes her feel completely trapped. For a moment, she genuinely wonders whether her life is about to end right there. The silence stretches long enough for Zero to grow irritated. He points out that her refusal to answer is becoming a problem. Instead of responding, Fi suddenly stands up. The two men watch her in confusion as she walks straight past them, grabs bread, and casually starts eating. Their attention immediately shifts toward her strange behavior. Noran questions why she suddenly begins eating during such a tense discussion, but after seeing the bread himself, he casually decides he feels hungry too. Zero immediately notes how quickly Noran changes his attitude compared to earlier. Noran simply blames the long walk for making him hungry. He then asks Fi to share some bread with him. She agrees without hesitation and hands him one while casually mentioning that she no longer uses the name Lady Rose. From now on, she goes by Fi Kuru instead. Noran accepts it easily and immediately takes a bite. The moment he tastes it, he openly praises the bread. Fi proudly explains that she sells this kind of bread at her workplace. Noran assumes she bakes it herself, but she clarifies that she is still learning. She explains how difficult it is to create a flavor balanced enough to stay enjoyable until the very last bite without becoming overwhelming or boring. Noran quietly acknowledges the amount of effort she puts into it. Zero eventually drags the conversation back to the original topic and reminds her that they are still waiting for her answer. Fi calmly continues eating while explaining that she wants to reserve her response for now. When Zero questions that decision, she admits that although her past is painful, she is satisfied with her current life. Because of that, promises of power or wealth no longer tempt her anymore. Deep down, the only thing she truly wishes for is staying away from war completely. Hearing that makes Norin stop Zero before he can push the matter further. Norin quietly asks him not to complicate things anymore and then admits to Fee that persuading her is probably impossible. The moment Norin stands up afterward, fear instantly grips her chest. When his hand moves toward his pocket, she becomes convinced he reaches for a weapon. Since persuasion fails, she assumes he decides to kill her instead. Her body immediately tenses as she prepares herself to dodge the first attack somehow. Instead, Norin suddenly steps closer and pulls her into an embrace. He casually remarks that she seems to be enjoying her current life quite a lot. The unexpected contact shocks Fee so badly that her heart nearly stops. She desperately convinces herself that the reaction comes purely from fear and anxiety. Norin eventually lets her go while laughing warmly. He admits that although he already knows Lady Rose is capable, he never imagined she would become this entertaining. Compared to the version he knows before, the current Fee interests him far more. Because of that, he decides to set aside the matter of war for now and instead visit her place more often because spending time with her sounds fun. Zero looks confused by Norin's sudden change of direction, but ultimately accepts it since Norin already makes up his mind. Unfortunately, Fee sees the situation very differently. If Norin starts visiting her frequently, Nicola will definitely notice sooner or later. That alone could easily create suspicions that she is plotting rebellion with a foreign prince. Completely ignoring her worries, Norin happily declares that they are friends now and encourages her to drop all formalities around him. Fee awkwardly admits that such a request feels extremely troublesome for her. Norin then compromises slightly and allows her to simply call him Norin instead. Fee internally complains because nobody seems interested in listening to her objections at all. Zero finally ends the discussion by explaining that since Norin already decides everything, there is no point arguing anymore. However, he firmly warns her to forget their earlier conversation completely. If she ever reveals it to anyone else, the consequences will not be pleasant. Fei immediately agrees because keeping everything secret also protects her own safety. After they finally leave, exhaustion crashes over her all at once. The entire encounter feels like a high-stakes gamble, yet somehow she survives peacefully in the end. She honestly never expects that simply eating bread during a dangerous negotiation would help her escape disaster. Because of that, she jokingly starts treating bread as some kind of all-powerful solution capable of rescuing her from every crisis. Once she collapses onto her bed, relief slowly settles into her body. She survives. She is not killed. She can continue living quietly as a commoner. Still, despite everything, she feels like Norin's affection flag rises again. That realization frustrates her deeply because she spends so much effort avoiding all the captured targets before their routes can properly begin. Yet somehow, even after changing countless events from the original story, key moments from their routes continue happening anyway. Worse, those affection flags rise even more naturally than before despite developing through completely different circumstances. After experiencing this repeatedly, she begins feeling as though some invisible force keeps dragging her back toward the game's original path no matter what she does. The idea of fate itself starts haunting her more and more. In her previous life, she is nothing special. She is merely an ordinary person without exceptional talent. Compared to true geniuses and extraordinary people, she always feels painfully average. No matter how much she struggles, fate continues cornering her endlessly. While those thoughts consume her, loud knocking suddenly shakes her door. The sound startles her badly enough to make her jump upright. Irritated, she internally complains that whoever is making such noise is going to bother the neighbors. Since the apartment beside hers is empty, she assumes Norin probably forgets something and comes back. Still exhausted, she walks toward the door and opens it without thinking too much. The moment she sees Mel standing there, shock immediately freezes her in place. Mel casually points out how careless she is for opening the door without even checking who is outside first. Fee freezes the moment she sees Mel standing at her door. After everything that happens earlier, his sudden appearance completely catches her off guard. When she asks why he comes here so late, he casually explains that he originally plans to warn her about the guests from the neighboring country. However, after seeing how exhausted she looks, he realizes he probably arrives too late to be useful. Because of that, he prepares to leave immediately instead of bothering her further. The moment he turns around, panic instantly pushes Fee into action. She quickly grabs him from behind before he can walk away. Her reaction even surprises herself because she never imagined she would cling to him this desperately. Mel calmly points out that she already understands why he visits her. Since he possesses an extensive intelligence network, learning about Norin and Zero's visit is naturally easy for him. He confirms that her assumption is correct and once again prepares to leave because there is nothing else left to discuss. Fee refuses to let go of his arm. She forces herself to act cheerful and welcoming because she desperately wants him to stay longer. Deep inside, she feels completely thrown off by her own behavior. In the original game, she is the heroine, yet somehow she ends up chasing after a capture target like this instead. The situation feels so far removed from the game that she starts wondering if everything has already derailed beyond repair. Unable to understand his motives, she questions why he even bothers warning her in the first place. As far as she knows, she no longer holds any value for contracts or transactions. Mel immediately explains that he already knows that. His visit has nothing to do with business interests. He simply wants to help her a little with her current troubles. That answer only confuses her more. They never share a particularly close relationship before, either in the past or now. Because of that, his kindness feels difficult to understand. She eventually asks him directly why he treats her so well. Instead of giving a straight answer, he pushes the question back toward her. Unfortunately, she genuinely has no clue herself. At some point, a dangerous thought suddenly crosses her mind. She wonders if he actually likes her romantically. The moment that possibility appears, she immediately threatens him in her head, convincing herself that if he ever confesses, she might actually shove fresh bread into his mouth just to stop him. Mel becomes visibly alarmed by the strange threat and points out how terrifying her imagination is. Fee internally realizes that if anyone truly tried harming him, the guards behind him would probably cut them down instantly anyway. Even so, he gently comments that she resembles a frightened little animal when she acts so cautious. He treats the remark half like a joke, but Fee takes it seriously because more than anything, she does not want him developing romantic feelings for her. That fear quickly overwhelms her emotions. Tears suddenly start falling from her eyes because the idea terrifies her more than she expects. If someone loved her in her current state, then it would only remind her how trapped she still is inside the game's story. After all, Mel has no way of knowing that the girl standing in front of him is originally the protagonist of an Odom game while he himself is one of the capture targets. Even after running away from everything, she still fears being dragged back into those routes against her will. In her heart, she believes only someone reincarnated into a similar situation could ever truly understand her feelings. Mel watches her quietly before reassuring her that she has nothing to worry about. No matter how beautiful she may be, he has no intention of falling for someone as frightening as her. Hearing that instantly relieves her. She becomes so openly thankful that Mel grows irritated instead. He complains about her overly happy reaction and then shifts the topic toward the nickname she keeps using for him. Realizing she goes too far again, Fee hurriedly apologizes and escapes into the kitchen under the excuse of preparing black tea. While making it, she slowly calms herself down. Looking back, she realizes Mel arrives at the perfect moment tonight. Even her old knowledge from playing Lady Rose proves useful because she instinctively prepares tea instead of coffee. She feels certain that offering coffee would probably make him leave much sooner. After returning with the tea, she notices him watching her carefully. He eventually points out that she constantly hides things and lies about her feelings, yet despite that, he can still sense some amount of trust from her. Otherwise, she would never keep questioning him about the noble society and the things happening behind the scenes. His observation embarrasses her because he sees through her far too easily. The truth is simple. Her curiosity constantly pushes her to understand what others are thinking and doing. Mel then wonders why she keeps relying on him instead of Nicholas. Since Nicholas grants her wish and supports her, it would logically make more sense for her to depend on him instead. Fee quietly admits that he is right. Nicholas always stands in the role of the ideal older brother in her mind, yet despite that, she still cannot bring herself to share everything with him. Meanwhile, Mel continues keeping people at a distance even while helping them kindly from the shadows. Because he never pressures her or expects anything from her, she feels strangely comfortable around him. Out of everyone, he becomes the only person beside whom she can relax and act spoiled sometimes. Unfortunately, remembering her earlier breakdown makes her want to erase the entire moment from existence. More than anything, she still wants to defeat fate itself. As the silence stretches, she notices his teacup becoming empty. If things continue like this, he will leave soon. The thought immediately makes her restless again, so she quickly offers another serving of tea before he can refuse properly. She insists so strongly that he eventually accepts it. Fee secretly feels relieved because keeping him here a little longer improves her mood considerably. For tonight at least, she allows herself to depend on him slightly more than usual. Now that she successfully delays his departure, she desperately searches for another topic to continue the conversation. Eventually, she brings up his personality instead. She explains that the version of him she knows acts far more calculating and distant. He usually speaks gently while carefully observing others from afar without truly letting anyone close. Compared to that image, the Mel in front of her feels much more blunt and straightforward. At first, she assumes he is cold, but over time she realizes he is actually a kind person who quietly looks after others. To her, he almost feels completely different from the Mel she remembers from Lady Rose. While comparing those versions of him, she slowly realizes she likes both sides of him anyway. Mel becomes curious about how much she already knows about him. He admits that if she were anyone else, he probably would not behave this way around her at all. That answer makes Fee smile unconsciously, since he is her favorite character from the game. Hearing those words genuinely makes her happy. Mel then notices how casually she speaks compared to before. Fee admits that speaking formally feels exhausting now. Since he already witnesses her uncultured side, she decides there is no point pretending anymore. Mel teasingly points out that she would probably be better off showing that side to Nicholas instead. Eventually, he stands up again and prepares to leave now that she seems calmer. Fee thanks him sincerely for staying with her. Before he can leave completely, she suddenly remembers the question he avoids earlier and demands an answer again about why he treats her so kindly. Mel immediately reminds her that she already uses up her questions during their previous exchange deal. Fee stubbornly argues that the earlier agreement only applies to business matters while this conversation happens between friends instead. Her reasoning leaves him speechless for a moment. Meanwhile, Fee quietly notices that he never denies the word friends. Even so, Mel refuses to answer properly. He explains that revealing the truth would only make her feel worse. That explanation immediately sends her imagination spiraling again. She becomes convinced the only possible reason must be romantic feelings and nearly shouts the accusation aloud before stopping herself. Instead of continuing the argument, Mel simply leaves while excusing himself calmly. Fee quickly runs after him verbally, asking him to visit again sometime. Mel pauses before questioning whether she truly has no friends at all. She admits that while she technically has friends, none of them are people she can comfortably show her plain and honest side to. Because of that, she genuinely enjoys spending time with him. After hearing that, Mel only replies that he will return if he feels like it. Even that vague answer satisfies her enough to smile brightly while watching him leave. Meanwhile, somewhere else inside the church, the saintess sits quietly in front of God and prays. While thinking back to her older brother's strange words from the previous day, she thanks God once again for blessing her life. At that moment, Nancy unexpectedly arrives at the church and becomes startled upon seeing the saintess there alone. The saintess gently invites her to sit and talk together for a while. Nancy becomes completely confused about why someone like the saintess suddenly approaches her. As they begin speaking, the saintess quietly reflects on fate. She explains that the world often feels controlled by unavoidable forces that ordinary people cannot escape from. As the powerless daughter of a viscount, she constantly feels like nothing more than a chess piece moved around by smarter and more powerful individuals. Even while understanding that reality, she still grows exhausted from it all. Because of that, she simply wants to speak with someone who appears untouched by those complicated schemes and burdens. Nancy apologizes honestly because she struggles to fully understand what the saintess means. Realizing her explanation sounds too heavy, the saintess softens her words and admits that she merely wants someone to talk to casually. Nancy happily agrees to that instead. Since they meet several times before without properly introducing themselves, the saintess finally introduces herself as Liana Inashi. Nancy then shyly introduces herself in return and explains that people usually call her Nana. Afterward, the two girls sit together and continue chatting peacefully. Neither of them realizes that this meeting itself is another cruel twist of fate already waiting to shape their futures. Whether this encounter becomes a blessing or disaster remains something only God knows. Next morning, Fee returns to the bakery and works like usual. While watching her handle the customers and prepare the bread, Michelle notices how much she improves recently. She points out that Fee already becomes quite skilled at baking and naturally adapts to serving customers too. To Michelle, it feels like Fee finally settles comfortably into the job. Fee feels happy hearing that, though she still believes she has a long way to go. As she watches the buns baking inside the oven, her thoughts drift toward everything that happens recently. Without realizing it, she praises Michelle's bread again and calls it amazing. Michelle misunderstands slightly and assumes she simply means the bread tastes good. Fee quickly clarifies that the bread is obviously delicious, but that is not the only reason she treasures it so much. In her heart, Michelle's bread practically saves her life multiple times whenever she corners herself in impossible situations. Because of that, she honestly starts viewing it as miracle bread. Unfortunately, her strange explanation only confuses Michelle. Realizing how oddly she phrases things, Fee awkwardly wonders if she accidentally says something offensive. Michelle reassures her that she is not upset at all. She simply never expects anyone to describe her bread in such an exaggerated way, so hearing it feels strange. Fee immediately understands why her reaction sounds weird. To everyone else, it is only ordinary bread. To her, however, it becomes something much more meaningful because it repeatedly helps her survive difficult moments. Michelle then quietly explains her own feelings about baking. She admits she cannot perform miracles or accomplish anything grand. All she can do is put her heart into her food and bring small moments of happiness to the people who eat it. Hearing that makes Fee smile sincerely. To her, that kind of life already sounds wonderful enough. At that moment, her thoughts naturally drift toward her own future. She realizes again that she has no desire to become queen, leave her name in history, or lives surrounded by luxury. Instead, she wants something much simpler. She wants peaceful days as an ordinary commoner, quietly sharing small happiness with others while occasionally receiving kindness in return. To her, that kind of calm life feels far more beautiful than fame or status ever could. As the bread continues baking, Michelle checks it carefully and decides it only needs a few more minutes. Then she casually mentions that Fee has enough talent to excel in many things if she truly tries. In Michelle's eyes, Fee is far more capable than she believes herself to be. Fee, however, cannot see herself that way at all. She never thinks of herself as someone special or talented enough to achieve miracles. Deep down, she believes she lives selfishly until now only because she desperately wants to survive and protect the life she chooses for herself. Since she never believes herself capable of changing the world, she never dedicates herself completely towards some impossible dream. A little later, Michelle tastes one of the freshly baked buns and becomes satisfied with the result. She decides the bread is finally good enough to sell in the bakery. The moment Fee realizes what that means, excitement instantly bursts out of her. She practically jumps in happiness after hearing that her bread passes Michelle's standards. Michelle watches her reaction with amusement before suddenly informing her to take a break from work starting tomorrow. Those words immediately crush Fee's excitement. Her mind races into panic within seconds, and she starts wondering if this is actually a polite way of firing her. She desperately replays every mistake she possibly makes recently and quickly grows miserable. Seeing her reaction, Michelle lightly smacks her and reassures her that she completely misunderstands. Michelle explains that Fee clearly goes through some stressful situation lately, so she simply wants her to rest and recover properly. Relief floods through Fee so strongly that she nearly becomes emotional again. Still confused, she questions how Michelle even notices something is wrong. Michelle casually answers that it is only intuition. Fee internally gives up after hearing that explanation. Even though giving someone an entire week off based purely on intuition sounds ridiculous, she already knows Michelle becomes stubborn once she makes up her mind. Since Michelle genuinely means well, Fee decides to simply accept the kindness quietly. Michelle warmly reassures her that the bakery will welcome her back anytime after the break. Fee jokingly warns that she returns and finds another part-timer replacing her instead. Michelle immediately promises that nothing like that will happen. Later, during her day off, Fee spends time with Nancy. While they sit together, Nancy hesitantly wonders whether it is really okay for her to monopolize Fee's free day like this. She points out that Fee already knows a handsome silver-haired nobleman, so logically she should rather spend her time going on dates with someone like him instead. Fee immediately dismisses the idea outwardly by explaining that he is a busy person and that going on dates with someone like him would honestly feel exhausting. Inside her head, however, she practically screams the opposite. The truth is that she feels extremely happy around him. Still, she restrains herself because they are not close enough yet for her affection to feel natural instead of overwhelming. She promises herself that once they become closer, she will openly shower Nancy with affection without holding back. While watching Nancy drink juice, another thought suddenly crosses Fee's mind. Nancy refers to Mel in a strangely familiar way. Calling him a silver-haired handsome noble could simply come from rumors, but the way she phrases things makes it sound like she actually meets him before. Since Fee barely talks about Mel at all, Nancy should not know much about him. Before she can think deeper about it, Nancy suddenly remembers something important. She explains that her teacher wants to meet Fee because apparently he owes her an apology. The moment Jack gets mentioned, Fee immediately starts piecing things together. When they first meet, she already suspects he carries the air of a noble. Then Mel somehow learns she is living as a commoner and visits her afterward. Combined with everything that happens recently, she starts feeling certain she understands where this is going. Nancy then explains how the situation happens. During a recent visit to the bakery, she buys bread and later gives some to her teacher as a gift. The moment she mentions where the bread comes from, his face suddenly turns pale before he starts talking about apologizing to Fee. That explanation only confuses Fee further. She repeatedly confirms whether Nancy truly only mentions the bakery and nothing else. Nancy insists that is exactly what happens. Fee honestly cannot understand it either. She wonders why hearing about a bakery would suddenly make someone feel guilty enough to apologize. For a brief moment, she considers whether Michelle's miracle bread somehow affects people's brains. Eventually, she asks Nancy to pass a message along instead. She explains that apologizing for unclear reasons would only make her uncomfortable. Even if he feels guilty about something, she already appreciates how kindly he treats her whenever she visits the church. Nancy happily agrees to deliver the message. Meanwhile, Fee continues thinking through the situation carefully. If Jack truly comes from noble society, then he probably already knows she is originally a duke's daughter and the former fiancée of the crown prince. It is possible Mel reveals everything to him. From that perspective, his fear and caution suddenly make much more sense. He probably no longer sees her as a simple commoner but as someone still connected to powerful nobles. Noticing her expression darken slightly, Nancy immediately worries that she becomes upset. Fee quickly denies it. Then Nancy suddenly leans closer and whispers that she actually thinks she roughly understands the real reason behind Jack's fear. Curious, Fee asks what she means. Nancy confidently explains that Michelle is probably the source of the problem because she seems like an incredibly important and terrifying person. Fee almost laughs from confusion. Nancy passionately continues anyway. According to the rumors around town, nobody can compare to Michelle. To Nancy, Michelle carries the overwhelming presence of some all-knowing figure secretly connected to the kingdom's intelligence forces. Fee finally understands where this misunderstanding comes from. Michelle does not feel intimidating because of wealth or noble status. Instead, she simply gives off the warm yet powerful aura of a dependable mother figure. Nancy becomes even more dramatic and loudly insists that Michelle must secretly work for the kingdom's hidden organizations. At this point, Fee finds the conversation strangely entertaining. Even so, she knows she really should correct Nancy's wild assumptions before they grow worse. Still, while listening to Nancy ramble, Fee cannot help appreciating Michelle even more. Michelle never treats her badly despite her complicated past. In fact, if Michelle actually knows Fee's former identity as Lady Rose, that alone should have been enough reason to avoid hiring her. Yet Michelle still accepts her kindly without hesitation. Thinking about that makes Fee realize there is no reason stressing over endless speculation. Everyone carries their own circumstances and hidden struggles. Nancy then suddenly turns serious and explains that people live according to their own reasons and situations. Because of that, she warns Fee not to trust others too easily without understanding how the world works first. Hearing such a lecture immediately catches Fee off guard. Only moments ago, Nancy passionately creates absurd conspiracy theories about Michelle. Yet now she suddenly speaks with strange wisdom. Fee stares at her in disbelief and silently wonders how one person can feel so random and inconsistent at the same time. Nancy, completely unaware of Fee's thoughts, proudly declares that she herself is perfectly fine no matter what because that is simply who she is. As Fee watches Nancy smile with complete innocence and sincerity, words like circumstances and reasons suddenly stop fitting her at all. An uninvited guest had arrived for a second time. A young woman with wavy hair greeted them with a strained smile, acknowledging their presence. At the doorway, a man with glasses and long hair requested that they refrain from visiting without warning, while beside him, a spiky-haired man named Nolan smiled confidently. The woman recalled that she had a bad feeling earlier. She had figured she was just chatting with Nana, Chan in her imagination, and had headed home merrily, but her good mood vanished the moment she spotted the two men. Inside, Nolan sat down, remarking on his own high and mighty attitude and stating that he could have broken down the door but waited for her instead. The woman refrained from commenting on his egotistical remarks. Zero, the man with glasses, glared reproachfully at Nolan, asserting that the prince's self-centered nature was the fault of his close aide and retainer himself, who let the bastard do whatever he wanted and failed to supervise his education. Zero smiled with visible pressure, making the woman feel she couldn't win against him. She mentioned that she didn't have the resources to be a very good host. Nolan, resting his chin on his hand, replied that he didn't need anything other than her attention. The woman let out a frustrated sound, visibly flustered by his words. Nolan sniffed the air, noting that something smelled good. The woman's heart fluttered at his shameless words spoken without batting an eye. She glanced away, admitting to herself that she was actually really into tough men like Nolan. She asked if he was a dog. Nolan ignored the insult, identifying the scent as bread. The woman told him not to sniff around as it was embarrassing. Nolan wondered aloud what that said about her, a girl of marriageable age working at a bakery, implying it was to be expected. The woman thanked them sarcastically for being polite. Zero stated that, as mentioned the other day, he preferred to stand as he was used to it. The woman offered Zero a seat as well. Zero pointed out that it was improper for her to speak to him so politely while addressing Nolan so casually, and asked her to drop the formalities with him as well, addressing her as Felicia. The woman realized he was right but explained that as a commoner, she had spoken that way since childhood and asked him to stop being so formal with her. She added that he should feel free to address her without honorifics, just as he did with Nolan. Felicia internally dismissed the polite demeanor as a lie, recalling that in the original story, similar words told to the protagonist were proven false in a later event. She knew that when the protagonist and Nola were not looking, Zero spoke informally and acted rather high-handedly while dealing with lower-ranked nobles. He swiftly quashed the hopes of his opponents while furthering his own aspirations. For such a master, this servant worked. Felicia already knew his true nature. Zero then asked if she had heard the news that Liliana-sama had collapsed, leaving Felicia stunned. Felicia anxiously asked if Lily-chan was alright or if she had fallen ill. Zero replied that from what he heard, it was not anything serious. Felicia internally screamed in disbelief at the idea of a collapse being nothing serious. Zero added that supposedly she would just be under exhaustive medical care for a week. Felicia questioned how it could be nothing serious when she required medical attention for one whole week. She wondered what exactly Lily-chan had been put through every day to collapse from fatigue. Felicia recalled Nika-sama saying it was just a matter of time before she did. She questioned what Nika-sama had been doing instead of watching over Lily-chan, but then reasoned he might have been busy with his own affairs since she had not seen him lately. Feeling she had no right to complain after selfishly running away from that world, she spun back and forth in worry. She hoped the overbearing prince was treating Lily-chan kindly and that she would get enough rest both mentally and physically during the week. The mention of a week triggered a sudden realization. Felicia asked Zero exactly when Liliana-sama collapsed. Nolan interjected that it was 3 days ago, right on the day they met Felicia. Felicia calculated the timing, realizing it was 1 week from that day, or rather, the following day. She recalled a flashback where Nika told her that everyone lives for their own reasons and with their individual circumstances, and that he wanted her to take a week to rest and recover from what must have been a do or die situation. Felicia realized that while Lily-chan collapsed 2 days ago, her own 1-week break started yesterday. Granted, they did not line up perfectly, but it was still too much of a coincidence. She felt the stage had been set all too conveniently. As a hand moved a chess piece in her mind's eye, she sensed that someone was planning to make use of both Lily-chan and herself for something. Realizing some sort of machinations were at work, Felicia wondered who was behind the recent events and who would gain from her meeting Lily-chan right now. She reflected on her desire to go against fate, acknowledging that God shapes fate, while Zero wondered who would find such a situation interesting. Deciding the topic was too difficult while eating, Felicia suggested they talk about something more lighthearted, leaving Nolan surprised. Felicia speculated that perhaps another reincarnated person in this world was tampering with fate according to their whims, noting many strange incidents recently. Nolan leaned in, commenting that the place looked like a doghouse but was surprisingly cozy, and asked if he could stay over. Felicia firmly refused. Zero checked his device and reminded Nolan of his official business the next afternoon, warning he wouldn't make it if he dallied any longer. Nolan complained about having to spend the night in the car. Felicia realized Zero had purposely told her about Lily Chan to gauge her response. Zero confirmed to an annoyed Nolan that he had wanted to speak with Felicia about Liliana for that very reason. Felicia admitted she had been so focused on the possibility of other reincarnated people and genuinely worried about Lily Chan that she hadn't paid attention to the news itself. She reasoned that if Zero was connected to that reincarnated person, he would strike first, so she decided to probe around a little while they were there. Since she couldn't win against Zero in sounding the other out, Felicia asked Nolan if there was anyone around who acted like they knew the future. Nolan pointed at her, but when she asked if there was anyone apart from her, he said no, though he laughed about having predicted the future before. Nolan then suggested that if they were talking about someone else, it wouldn't that be Elle. Felicia asked who Elle was, and Nolan eagerly asked her to tell him more about that person. Zero covered his mouth and stated that information about that person was a national secret since their countries were allies. He noted that even Felicia hadn't been told, and asked Nolan to keep his explanation to a minimum. Nolan yelled that spilling the beans about Elle and making that person mad would be a fine way of starting a war. Felicia felt her heart pound, realizing this case was turning out to be more dangerous than she thought. Zero calmly stated that war wouldn't break out, but Nolan warned that if Elle was angered, they would be crushed to dust before the battle could even begin. Felicia wondered what kind of person Elle was for even Zero to speak so solemnly. She considered that Mel Chan might know something, as that child had eyes and ears all over the kingdom and abroad, though she doubted he would tell her even if he knew. She decided she still wanted to acquire as much information as possible, despite the risk of provoking Elle by asking around. Felicia asked if there was anything else he could tell her, like their age or gender. Nolan replied that he didn't even know that himself, as Elle had never shown their face in public. He added that aside from the mystery of their existence, the kingdom's king was probably the only one who knew their face. When Felicia asked if he had never met them, Nolan confirmed he hadn't. He explained that rumors varied. Some said Elle had been around for over a century, while others said they came from the countryside 16 years ago. He didn't know their real name, and there were many rumors about their gender. Felicia focused on the mention of 16 years ago. She realized that was the year the protagonist and Lily Chan were born, as well as the majority of the capture targets. She felt there must be a reason for the rumors to mention such a specific time frame. Nolan began to explain that 16 years ago, made a prophecy about some baby from a noble family, but Zero cut him off. Zero warned Nolan to hold his tongue unless he had a death wish. Nolan groaned, realizing he had said too much, and thought to himself that men really tended to loosen their tongues around women who were just their type. Felicia deduced that a prophecy about a baby 16 years ago couldn't be a coincidence, and if the prophecy was made then, they could at least presume that Elle wasn't a baby at that time. Felicia reasoned that since their words were taken seriously, they must be someone of high status to begin with, especially since only the king himself knew their face. She thought that since that person's age and gender were a mystery, it wouldn't be surprising if they came in contact with her without her realizing it, perhaps sometime in the past while she was in high society. She decided she needed to give this matter some proper thought. Zero announced they were leaving. Felicia told them to take care on their way back, relieved they were finally leaving. As they departed, Nolan leaned close to Felicia and told her to do her best to stir up something interesting. Felicia shuddered, nearly forgetting that Nola had an overly straightforward attitude. Felicia realized he was right. Nola hadn't seriously given up on the notion of war yet. He was just killing time with her. She observed that despite his nondescript disguise and a haphazard gait, he still effortlessly exuded the aura of a prince. She wondered just how powerful this being known as Elle was to impose silence on even the likes of him. Felicia resolved that no matter how mighty they were, if they were pulling the strings of fate, then she would have to beat this Elle. Felicia yawning and stretching in her pajamas. She reflected that after Nola left, she had stayed up late thinking things through, though she resolved not to make a habit of it as it took its toll in the early morning. Thanks to that, she managed to sort out her thoughts a little. First of all, she questioned who else had reincarnated into this world apart from herself. As she got dressed, she concluded that it would almost certainly be Elle. Although they were only brought up because she asked Nola whether someone like them existed, their name coming up when it did was way too much of a coincidence. She recalled Al made a prophecy 16 years ago, the very year in which a vast majority of the main characters of Laddie Rose were born. She considered it possible that they weren't foretelling the future, but merely sharing information they had learned in their previous life, similar to the prophecy she had made before. In that case, she wondered who Al might be. She noted that their age was unknown, but since the prophetic words were originally said by a child for fun, it was possible El was a child at that time. Even if they were a baby, that didn't necessarily mean they made the prophecy immediately after they were born. They would still be considered a baby at around the age of 1. She analyzed a timeline in her head where Nolan was 17, Fi and others were 16, and Jade was 15. She reasoned that if El had reincarnated, they should have been able to speak without much difficulty. This meant the age difference between El and the babies of noble birth was likely pretty slim, so they should be more than 16 years old. Based on what Nola said about the country's king being the only one who knows El's face, and purely on speculation, she deduced there was a strong likelihood they were a noble here. She concluded that El was in a position where they could observe both herself and the starring characters of Laddie Rose. As she lifted a heavy sack of flour, she reasoned that if she were in El's shoes, she would want to check with her own eyes whether everything was unfolding perfectly according to her prophecy. She acknowledged that since it concerned the neighboring kingdom, and she was just a child, it would have been an impossible feat at the time the prophecy was made. Taking these factors into account, she realized the list of potential candidates could be narrowed down considerably to a high-status individual who is a citizen of this kingdom and has the means to even monitor her present self. Felicia considered Nika Sama as the first suspect. He was 3 years older than her and a genius, so she hadn't been particularly suspicious of the mature speech and behavior he had displayed since childhood. She reasoned that his attachment to her and his frequent visits could be a way to keep tabs on the heroine who had taken a course of action deviating from the original scenario. She noted that when a national suspect was placed under surveillance, common soldiers were typically assigned to secretly keep watch, making his line of thought convincing. Furthermore, given the position Nika Sama held, he must have had great insight into Lily Chan's situation. She felt that with this theory, everything could be adequately explained, but stopped herself from jumping to conclusions, considering it possible he was pulling Lily Chan's strings to deflect suspicions away from himself. Next, she considered Mel Chan. He was well informed of affairs both within and outside the kingdom and familiar with how people thought and acted, placing him in an optimum position to mess around with others. She recalled that during the one-answer game they played the other day, she hadn't inquired into Mel Chan himself. Since Mel Chan had no way of knowing about her previous life, she realized she had spoken at length with that assumption, and if everything in its entirety were a ruse, it was concerning. She also decided that the likes of Nola couldn't be ruled out either. He had brought up Lily Chan's name time and time again, associating him with her. Despite not having any clear connections up until now, he had been unusually fixated on her, more so than in the original game. She reasoned he wouldn't have taken the trouble to visit her with an invitation of war otherwise, though she noted that Nola acted without restraint, suggesting his hands might be tied, allowing her to probably cross 0 off the list. She then ran through the unlikely candidates to cover all bases, starting with the domineering Prince Seth and Evan Kun, though she highly doubted either of them were El. She noted that both had stayed true to the game without sounding any alarm bells, and she hadn't met them since she got demoted to a commoner. She observed that the obsessive, puppy dog like Evan Kun was guaranteed to come bounding over were the overbearing prince to catch whiff of her whereabouts. She also considered Jack San, whom she had never crossed paths with before becoming a commoner. He seemed wholly detached from the academy, which served as a backdrop for the game, so she safely eliminated him. She thought about Jed, who was 1 year younger than her and thus a poor fit age-wise, but the mystery of his attempted yonder line still simmered in the back of her mind. She supposed that if the true mastermind behind El were Nika Sama, he might have made use of Mastermind Jed to twist the scenario, which sounded plausible too. Finally, she considered Lily Chan. They had barely spoken aside from circumstances arising from the game's scenarios. Felicia reasoned that if Lily Chan were reincarnated, she would expect her to make a greater effort to interact with her, the main character, from the mindset of a typical player. Therefore, she concluded it couldn't be her, as she didn't understand her motives for targeting her through malicious rumors and harassment. Felicia pondered if Lily Chan had wanted to become a commoner just like her. If she were reincarnated, it would mean she was aware that the road to destruction lay ahead. However, Felicia recalled that when she strayed from the game's course at that crucial moment, Lily Chan should have shown some kind of reaction if that were the case. Sighing, she felt that somehow, this game had evolved from an Odom game into a detective game just for her. Regardless of who El was, the most pressing issue was what they would do from now on. She reasoned that if she were L, she would try to make contact with Lily Chan, as it would be the perfect form of entertainment, since even the person in question had no idea how things would turn out. However, considering the difference in their social status and the fact that Lily Chan was still recuperating, meeting her seemed impossible unless she kidnapped her. She quickly dismissed the thought, deciding that even L wouldn't stoop that low. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Felicia wondered who in the world would come calling so early in the morning. She decided it was useless to rack her brains over L, since she didn't have a clue, and resolved to remain calm regardless of who the visitor might be. Fearing it could be L, she opened the door to find Nika-sama standing there with flowers. Felicia greeted him, noting it had been a while, and Nika apologized for bothering her so early in the morning. Nika remarked that it wasn't the first time he had come directly to her house. He explained that he didn't have much time to spare that day, but there were a few things he would like to discuss with her. When Felicia asked what it was, Nika pointed towards a chair. Nika asked if the bread was her breakfast for the day. Felicia replied that it was her lunch as well, though she offered him some. Nika declined, noting that while bread was delicious, that was not what he was getting at. Felicia correctly guessed that he had a hunch she'd been eating bread every day for every meal. Nika observed that her eyes were shifty. He then asked if she was bad at cooking. Felicia denied it, stating that as a former noblewoman, it was par for the course. She claimed she just did not want to waste perfectly good bread and wanted to cut down on food expenses. Nika stated that was not the case. Felicia internally noted that she had picked up basic domestic skills when she started living alone in high school in her previous life, but she could not tell Nika that. Nika expressed relief and ordered his men to bring the items in. Soldiers carried in bags of vegetables and fruits. Nika explained he was worried about her eating habits, leaving Felicia confused about what they were for. The soldiers then brought in a refrigerator. Nika explained that since the house did not have one, he brought it along. Felicia was overwhelmed, wondering where to even begin since he went as far as to lug over a refrigerator. Nika decided that since he was there, he might as well make something that day. Nika announced he was borrowing her kitchen to try his hand at cooking because he wanted to. Felicia tried to stop him, telling him not to lower himself to cook and that she could not keep up with his antics. Nika told her to wait a minute. Felicia asked if he had any cooking experience. Nika replied that he had acquired some knowledge by watching and noted she had a full array of utensils. Felicia internally thought he was a disaster waiting to happen. A cat walked past as Nika announced he was done holding a fork while Felicia looked completely drained. A beautifully presented spread of food was revealed. Nika asked what was wrong and if something did not suit her tastes. Felicia sparkled and cried, insisting that was not it. Nika's soldiers were shocked that he, a novice cook, could prepare such a meal promptly in a household kitchen. The soldiers flatly refused his order, leaving Felicia wondering if they were seriously refusing a royal command. Nika suggested poison tasting and asked someone to carry the food out, but quickly corrected himself. Felicia grabbed the food, exclaiming that it looked delicious and declaring she would not let anyone else have a single bite as she dug in to taste it for poison. Nika conceded the situation, wondering why he was letting it happen instead of scolding them. Felicia ate the food rapidly. Nika watched nervously as she trembled. She thought the food was simply divine. Nika was relieved that it looked sublime and tasted absolutely delicious despite his fears, internally acknowledging his own genius. Nika put on his coat, stating that since he had made sure she was eating well, he was taking his leave. Felicia was surprised he was heading back already despite coming for important business. Nika replied that her eating habits were more important than business, which they could discuss on another occasion. He said he would see her again soon. Felicia invited him to come by any time since she was on a week-long break, thinking that would be perfect as he closed the door. Sitting at the table, Felicia realized she missed the chance to ask Nika about Lily Chan's condition. She was shocked that her eating habits were prioritized so highly. She decided not asking was the right move, reasoning that if Lily Chan's collapse was not widely publicized, Nika might have been suspicious of her source, and there was a high likelihood he was L. She wondered if he was just probing around, lamenting the appearance of a dangerous element like L, but noted the dessert was scrumptious. A girl greeted Felicia. Felicia noted the girl looked worn down. The girl asked if it was obvious, pointing out Felicia's dark circles and saying she looked like she needed a long hibernation instead of her usual pretty self, leaving Felicia confused by the term. Nana-chan greeted Felicia cheerfully. Felicia looked worn down, and Nana-chan pointed out the dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she looked like she needed a long hibernation. Felicia was confused by the term. Although Felicia had reservations about visiting Nana-chan so soon, she was glad she came, noting the girl's overwhelmingly therapeutic and soothing aura. Nana-chan compared the dark shadows under Felicia's eyes to bears, causing Felicia to be overwhelmed by the cuteness. Nana-chan advised Felicia to let loose and enjoy life a little more, noting that she seemed like the type to overthink. Felicia explained that something troubling had happened, so she was fretting over it all night. Felicia laughed, imagining her sensei always getting angry at her for being too carefree. Felicia agreed that while she needed to work hard to figure out how to resolve her problems, she should still set aside time to relax. Nana-chan suggested they talk about something fun to lighten the mood. Felicia asked if Nana-chan was free right now. Nana-chan confirmed she always gave herself a break whenever sensei headed out, which Felicia internally noted was just slacking off. Felicia reflected that she still had not found the answer to who Elle was, but at the very least, they did not seem to be anyone in this town. Felicia recalled that the game never expounded upon what happened to Liliana after her banishment, and she only learned where she would be living just before she was thrown out. She reasoned that even if another reincarnated person was involved, they should not have been able to predict she would move to this town. She found it inconceivable that her father in this world, who hated being ordered around, would have sent her here under Elle's instructions. She concluded that the commoners she had met in this town, Michelle-san and Nana-chan, should be in the clear. She then paused, thinking it was hard to imagine Elle, who likely held a lofty position, living in the suburbs. Felicia considered that Nana-chan had Jack-san. She wondered if them being part of the clergy was just their cover, and if in reality she was making him, a low-ranking noble, wait upon her. Nana-chan called out to Felicia, noting it was nice and warm, and suggested they sit over there and chat. Felicia wondered if Nana-chan tumbling down during their first meeting was just a stunt to make contact with her if she were Elle. Felicia dismissed the thought, reasoning that if Nana-chan were faking her natural airheadedness, she would have seen through it on the spot. She found it hard to believe that her childlike mannerisms were all an act. Felicia made her decision to place her trust in Michelle-san and Nana-chan wholeheartedly. She concluded that even in the unlikely event that either of them was deceiving her, they would still be important people to her that she was fond of, though she would probably cry her eyes out. Felicia realized her current situation was pretty fantastical and unrealistic, supposing it might make an interesting topic of conversation. She decided to discuss something fun and asked Nana-chan a purely hypothetical question about what she would do if she reincarnated into the world of her favorite story with the knowledge of what would transpire there, asking how she would live. Nana-chan did not understand the term reincarnated, so Felicia clarified it as rebirth, explaining it referred to a person who had already died once getting a second chance at life. Nana-chan understood. Felicia apologized, realizing she had inadvertently taught her a foreign term since the concept of the 6 realms of karmic rebirth might not exist in this world. Nana-chan thought about it deeply, which Felicia found adorable. Nana-chan declared she loved the idea, thinking it sounded just like a game and would treat it as a real-life fantasy. Nana-chan stated she would first wait and observe. Felicia was surprised by this careful approach, having expected Nana-chan to rush headlong into something, though she acknowledged her own thought was rude. Nana-chan explained that she could not be sure whether it was really the world she knew, or if it would follow the familiar course unless she saw it for herself. Felicia agreed, noting she had noticed early on that this was the world of Lady Rose because she had reincarnated as its protagonist and gotten engaged to that overbearing prince, realizing she could have remained completely unaware if her position and status had been different. Nana-chan added that once she ascertained she was the real deal, she would try to see if she could change the future with her actions. Felicia deduced that if that was the case, there was a strong possibility that Elle, who came to the realization fairly quickly and made a prophecy, was one of the capture targets. Nana-chan considered what to do if she was not able to change it. Felicia replied she would just move from a place she knew well to a place she did not and live a humble life, because it was scary, which Nana-chan found pragmatic. Felicia noted that the universe would keep drawing her back in to deny her peace, pointing to her own situation where she was told to restore her reputation, stop, live together, and wage war. She noted that even if one tried to live on a shoestring, if she was able to change it, she would. Nana-chan enthusiastically declared that from then on, she would try to make everything fun and promised not to tell a soul. Felicia noted that the conversation had ended and that Nana-chan had made it all about having a great time. Nana-chan added that it was fun speculating about these hypothetical scenarios. Felicia considered that it would be nice if Nana-chan were Elle and a reincarnated person, reasoning that in that case, everyone would be able to attain happiness. Nana-chan told Felicia she thought she was already doing her best, except for slacking at work at that moment. Felicia reflected that the reality was that way too many things did not turn out as wished, so she too needed to work harder. She considered Nana-chan the paragon of nunhood, observing that even if she were not guiding a lost lamb like her, she still seemed to be the type to enthusiastically do her job. Nana-chan asked what exactly Felicia hoped to do. Felicia concluded she still had a long way to go and needed to work much harder. Nana-chan declared that she wanted to make everyone happy, radiating a blinding light. Felicia was moved to tears, thinking she was an actual angel. She recalled someone saying he would reduce her to a puddle of adoration, realizing that if one kept an angel like her all to themselves, they would incur divine punishment. Felicia thanked God, little knowing that this would be the last day she spent in blissful ignorance.